Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Berube. I'm the Interim Vice President and Director of Brookings Metro. So on behalf of Brookings and Brookings Metro, welcome. My staff have already let me know that after seeing this space, they are never going back to the Brookings buildings. But for those of you who are new to us, new to Brookings Metro, just a bit about us. Our mission is to collaborate with local leaders to transform original insights into solutions that scale nationally. So the theme of today's summit, or is it helping communities make the most of historic public investment, it really goes straight to the heart of our mission. And our partner, the Kresge Foundation, they've been a steadfast supporter of Brookings Metro's mission since our founding 27 years ago, and we're so grateful for their continuing partnership. And we're grateful, of course, to all of you for being here today. If you were there last night, as Amy Liu, our interim president and former vice president of Metro, mentioned, Brookings Metro is effective precisely because of our relationships with government, business, civic, and philanthropic leaders all around the country. I think there are roughly 40 different city regions represented in the room today. So I thought I'd go through them alphabetically and then ask you to stand when, no, I'm not going to do that. Even if I had the time, I wouldn't do that. Kresge Foundation President Rip Rapson and I want to take a few minutes this morning to set the stage for the day. So I'll briefly talk about the broader developments in our economy, our society, and our democracy that I think bring us to this juncture. And I'll reflect on why this summit and the work to which you all are dedicated is so critical to helping us meet this historic moment. So to begin, our team at Brookings Metro, we're focused on three big forces that shape our daily efforts to deliver and create inclusive prosperity for our nation and for our communities. First, we're navigating profound technological changes like generative AI and remote work. These are technologies that could fundamentally restructure significant portions of the labor market, creating incredible opportunities for some, but massive uncertainties for others. Second, we're undergoing demographic changes that are transforming the American population along age, racial, and ethnic lines. And these changes highlight the continued threat that deep-seated structural inequalities pose for our collective economic future. And then third, we're witnessing the clear and present dangers that global climate change presents for our communities, especially economically vulnerable ones from events such as extreme heat, intensifying storms, and sea level rise. All of that said, I think it's possible to paint these trends with too broad a brush. The United States is, after all, the world's third most populous nation. It's spread across the world's fourth largest landmass. So naturally, the scale and the nature of these challenges vary tremendously across our landscape. They come to ground most clearly in our metro areas. These are the city regions where 90% of Americans live and where ideas, infrastructure, and institutions combine in diverse ways to shape local outcomes. As a result, when it comes to these massive forces shaping our economy and our society, your mileage may vary. For instance, rapid technological progress has meant fast job and income growth for regions like Boston and the Bay Area, but job loss and economic instability in a lot of heartland metros. These historic patterns of racial and economic segregation, they divide large metro areas primarily along neighborhood lines, but often mid-sized metros at more of the urban-rural frontier. And climate change, of course, is exposing very different vulnerabilities to heat, fire, and flooding events from region to region that demand distinctive local adaptations. So in that regard, one of, I think, the positive features of our decentralized, distributed system of governance in the United States is that it allows for tremendous variation in how we respond to these big challenges. That's how a nation whose identity was forged in suspicion of strong government nonetheless generates so many of the world's most admired and replicated solutions to public problems. One of the limitations of that system, however, is that local enablement has too often been a stalking horse for national abdication. Over the last 40 to 50 years, as automation, globalization, immigration, resource extraction transformed American society, Washington regularly failed to step up. And the lack of a robust federal response left our communities under-equipped in a few key ways. We underinvested in public goods like infrastructure, education, research, and clean energy that the private market alone won't provide enough of. We tolerated growing social and geographic inequality as the market multiplied built-in advantages for some people and places while leaving others behind. And we eroded public sector capacity at all levels, foregoing the depth and experience necessary to coordinate responses to modern, complex challenges. Against that backdrop, then, the burst of federal investment from 4 significant bills we'll discuss today, the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, and the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, these represent a seismic policy shift in at least 3 dimensions. First, they represent a shift in the theory of federal economic policy, a pivot from trickle-down economics at some times, redistributive policies at others, to what Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has called a modern supply-side strategy. And that strategy focuses on increasing the productive capacity of America's companies, its workers, and its communities. Second, they represent a shift in the scale of federal investment. As evidence of that, in 2022, non-defense federal spending on physical capital, research and development, and education and training as a percent of our GDP reached its highest level in at least 60 years. And third, they represent a shift in the orientation of federal efforts to grow our economy. Rather than assume Washington has all the answers, many of these bills empower places to advance key national priorities by supporting local leaders' tailored efforts to generate inclusive prosperity. So as we gather here in late 2023, we're still early in the implementation of many of these bills. So in honor of the many Philadelphians in the room today, I see Pat over there, yeah, let's call this the 3rd inning. Given where we are, local leaders, you should be putting your best players on the field. Those players should swing not only for the fences like, say, Kyle Schwarber or Bryce Harper, they should also do the smaller things that advance the runners like Trey Turner. What I'm saying is basically, you should try to be a former Washington National. Oh, good, we have some Nats fans in the room. I was worried that joke was just going to fall dead. Putting our baseball metaphors aside, this moment does demand, I think, a few key things of local government, business, educational, and civic sector leaders around the country. It demands ambition. Do you have plans that are scaled to the challenges? It demands capacity. Do you have the right institutions and people to manage the plans? It demands coordination. Do you have relationships with and trust among the right partners within and across sectors to execute on the plans? And of course, it demands finance. Do you have the right quantities and forms of capital to sustain the plans? So today's summit, and this morning's plenaries and this afternoon's workshops, will explore these questions from the perspective of communities themselves. At the same time, though, this is also a crucial moment for leaders here in Washington. Across federal agencies, devoted and entrepreneurial public servants, many of whom are in the room today, are facing huge challenges helping local leaders navigate this policy surge. So we'll talk about how we can develop durable ways for federal partners to engage productively with local and regional leaders on this modern supply side agenda. I want to conclude with an acknowledgement. There's a lot of suffering and peril in a lot of communities around the world today. So it can sometimes feel a little bit beside the point to focus on the much longer term efforts that this agenda demands. But I also believe that seizing this moment to build new bridges between Washington and more of our communities, and within our communities among diverse leaders dedicated to a more inclusive and sustainable future, that is the way through, that is the way forward. I think it can offer us sustenance we all need to weather difficult times like these, and I hope it can reinforce the infrastructure that will strengthen our society for generations to come. So thank you again for being with us today, for staying with us on this journey ahead. It's now my great pleasure to turn the podium over to our co-host in the summit, America's leading philanthropic voice on delivering opportunity for residents of our cities. Please join me in welcoming Rip Rapson, President and CEO of the Kresge Foundation.
It's always a problem with Alan. You got to get like a forklift to get the mic down. But thank you, Alan, for such a thoughtful and elegant setup. For those of you who couldn't track the baseball analogy, let me just say that we asked Alan to come to our board of directors a little while ago, and he somehow, I still don't understand how, set up the 4 acts with 4 leading basketball players. And so if you thought the baseball was esoteric, you should have been at our... brilliant, but esoteric. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just, I think, reinforce some of the themes that Alan has already sounded, but maybe take them a little bit in a different direction. Because, for the last couple of years, the philanthropic biosphere and think tanks, local governments have been, quite appropriately, transfixed by the question of how to land these federal dollars in place. And we've seen a proliferation of efforts within philanthropy, among federal agencies, and across national trade organizations to facilitate, accelerate, and otherwise enhance the ability of localities to draw down those federal funds. Think of the local infrastructure hub that was masterminded by Bloomberg and the National League of Cities, which prepares small cities and towns to make successful applications for competitive federal grants, or Hyphen, which is an effort to devise approaches for philanthropy to co-invest alongside government, or the What Works Collaborative, which serves as a central information clearinghouse for creative and effective local drawdown strategies. All of this tremendously important work is worth every ounce of the time, the money, and the brain power dedicated to it. Individually and collectively, these efforts are a powerful jumpstart to a process of unfathomable complexity and profound import. And yet, they are just a jumpstart. I think it can be argued that the more difficult challenges actually lie ahead. Accessing those dollars may be a necessary ingredient to positioning our communities for the waves of challenges rolling in. Upgrading essential infrastructure, moving catalytic dollars into climate preparedness, training our workforce for the next generation tech and energy economy, eliminating health, education, and income disparities among communities of color, the list goes on and on. But I would say that they are not sufficient. They themselves simply will not do the trick. We accordingly need to talk as much about imagining and implementing and sustaining as we do about drawing down. And that's the substance of the next hours we're going to spend together this morning and this afternoon. How to ensure that these dollars become more than one-time spikes in civic expenditure and instead take on qualities of community transformation. Now, those topics, implementation, sort of the technical sort of nuts and bolts of getting things to ground, do run the risk of failing to stir our imaginations and our souls. They often don't generate press releases. But without smart implementation and without adopting approaches that can be generative over the long term, we will be coming together in 5 years or 10 years from now and asking ourselves, what happened? How on earth did we manage to let this opportunity slip through our fingers? From Kresge's perspective, based on our team's deep local work in Detroit, Fresno, Memphis, New Orleans, and other cities, 3 elements appear to be essential to getting it right. First, activating or building cross-sector and cross-disciplinary capacity to plan for, absorb, and distribute these funds. Second, reverse engineering the right forms of capital in the right doses, in the right sequence, and through the right channels to stimulate market investment. And third, unpacking and redistributing risk based on who can take more and who should bear less. And arcing across all 3 of those is the understanding that these imperatives must be placed in service of mitigating and adapting to climate vulnerability and pursuing reparative racial equity. So there's probably not enough coffee in the building, although I don't think I've ever seen so much coffee in a building. This is really quite something. But even with all that coffee, I'm not going to try to keep you awake while sort of unpacking each one of those examples. So let me instead leave that to our panels, and I'm going to instead unpack them at a slightly higher altitude. So first, activating cross-sector and cross-disciplinary responses. No single entity, no matter how dedicated, how experienced, and how high in capacity, can activate these dollars all by itself. Although local governments hold the election certificates, they also have to struggle with the regular churn of personnel and the cadence of local elections marching on without regard to federal spending deadlines. And that's not to mention that the nonprofit sector is often the execution arm of municipal public policy apparatus. The bottom line, you need a big, distributed team now more than ever. That's certainly one of the messages you'll hear from Ashley Swearingen, the head of Fresno Central Valley Community Foundation, when she describes the monies flowing into the Fresno Drive Plan, a blueprint that emerged from more than 300 individuals representing more than 150 civic, community, and business stakeholders. Places that have built the muscle to work across disciplines and across sectors are the ones who not only draw down the dollars, but also have a tremendous advantage in both spending them well and effectively extending the implementation horizon. Now, the best time to develop that muscle, unfortunately, was 10 years ago. The second best time, however, is right now. It is not too late. It's almost too late, but it is not quite too late to build the team with the capacities to spend federal funds for transformation. And you'll notice I said capacities, plural, because you need an alignment among organizations to ensure that the full spectrum of civic capacities is well-positioned, well-resourced, and well-informed about the opportunities potentially moving in their direction. You need the people who can reset not only what elements of infrastructure are created, for whom and to what purpose, but also who designs that infrastructure, who builds it, and what roles nonprofit delivery systems and local procurement policies can play. You need a range of actors to invest in the community-based capacity to hold decision makers accountable. So next, the second bucket, reimagining capital configurations and deployment channels. Even more than the ARPA dollars, the dollars flowing from the Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act need steering. Steering away from the projects bound up by the inertias of traditionally conceived and executed public works projects. It's all too tempting for cities to default to civic autopilot, ensuring that the dollars move in channels of least resistance, channels that meet the needs of rapid deployment or political expediency, but not the imperatives of advancing equity or facing down climate change. And yet, scores of examples are emerging in which cities are reimagining those channels in bold and innovative ways, braiding together multiple forms of capital from various sources to carry federal dollars the critical last mile to projects that deliver for low-income communities. Just a very quick example from our hometown of Detroit, where the city is using federal dollars to create a 30-mile greenway circling the city a la the Atlanta Beltline. The city is paying to clear the right-of-way and to lay the concrete. But to catapult from concrete to community building and to create development without displacement will require an investment of philanthropic dollars, community sweat equity, CDFI financing, and other sources of creative capital to build out safe, inclusive, inviting, and connected communities along the greenway's edge. And so finally, the third bucket, redistributing risk. People in this room, and indeed around the country, are being called on to navigate a trifecta that simultaneously advances racial equity, contributes to a carbon-neutral future, and puts dollars to work within an aggressively tight expenditure window. That ambition is unprecedented, but so too is the level of risk. We can be assured that things will simply not go as planned, that decision makers will make some very bad decisions, and that there will be front-page stories and partisan vituperation about failed projects and unrealized visions. So opting for caution for the default setting in the face of that risk is all too tempting, but it is unacceptable, full stop. Reinforcing and fortifying the status quo is to relegate our children to a dystopian, unjust, and unsustainable future. It is crystal clear who will be left holding the bag for our non-performance. So the choice is not whether to embrace risk, but how. Now, philanthropy has a suite of tools we can use to lower the perceived risk of public and private investment in communities, including grants, loans, guarantees, equity investments, and any number of other tools. But our role needs to be played in the context of a civic framework of interwoven and mutually assumed responsibility among all the sectors. Let's think about for a moment what that might look like in the context of a hypothetical new manufacturing plant built with federal subsidies from the CHIPS and Science Act. We could imagine a robust and rigorously enforced community benefits agreement. We could expect a variety of federal, state, and local subsidies that serve to de-risk the private sector investment in the plan. We could foresee companies making commitments to job creation, prevailing wages, and worker and community investments. And we could anticipate multiple sectors contributing to building regional capacity for the kind of training and supply chain enhancements necessary to generate a healthy pipeline of workers to hire and businesses from which to purchase. So the goal should be a methodology in which every sector, every part of the calculus, is connected to and bolstered by the others in pursuit of genuinely shared prosperity. Let me close by acknowledging the very practical, difficult pressures you all are facing. Because the federal stopwatch is ticking, local governments have to make big decisions in the near term, and that creates an acute tension. On one hand, if cities move too fast, they risk spending the monies in ways that won't achieve the ambitious goals that they and the administration have set, staggering sums that cities are unlikely to see again in our lifetime. On the other hand, if cities move too slowly, paralyzed by the high aspiration and degrees of difficulty of transformation, they could readily bog down, surrender to overwhelm, and revert to the quick and easy. The only escape route, it seems to me, is to sight against a more distant horizon. The transformation we seek doesn't happen in a moment or in a single presidential administration. If we, all of us and all of our partners, can step back and contribute to a decision-making framework that comprises both short-term victories, intermediate milestones of progress, and long-term recalibration of public systems, we have a shot at getting it right. That approach helps us to be accretive, with each new infusion of federal funds opening new pathways for investment. That approach enables our actions to be compounding, with each project holding the potential for exponentially higher impact. And that approach contributes to civic efficacy, with each milestone bolstering a place's capacity to take on increasingly wicked challenges. And that's all a very tall order, to be sure. But the panels we're going to hear from today should make you feel good about our prospects for creating local structures that pull down and land federal resources in an equitable way. And to get us started, I have the deep honor of introducing our first panel, How Federal Investments Can Spur Equitable Growth. We'll hear from the formidable team of Heather Boucher from the Council on Economic Advisors, Diana Lim of the Treasury Department, and it'll be moderated by Robert Simpson of Center State CEO. So thank you all very much.
Good morning, everybody. And Rip, thank you. Alan, thank you for your partnership in convening this important discussion. I've always been so proud to be affiliated with Brookings Metro and the so many partners that they accumulate over all the years. And I was reflecting this morning, for those who were at the reception last night, Amy sort of shared, she sort of thinks about this cohort as sort of fellow travelers, right? And that resonates with me as someone who's been traveling to these convenings now for close to 2 decades. Whether you're a partner from Birmingham, Alabama, or Tulsa, or maybe Columbus, or where we're from in Syracuse, all the corners of our nation, individuals who have been struggling to find ways to reinvest and revitalize their communities, right? And it can feel like a struggle sometimes. You sort of face these dual crises of both a need to grow, but also the increasing racial and socioeconomic disparities that also hold our communities back. And I think for many of us in this room, it's probably felt on some level that for the last couple of decades, we've been sort of sleepwalking through the same cycle of dysfunction and perhaps federal inaction that has made our jobs all the more difficult. And then you wake up from the dream, and you open your eyes, and you have the American Rescue Plan. And then shortly thereafter, you have the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Recovery Act. And in a span of 2.5 years, you have more federal activity on a US competitiveness agenda than many of us have seen in our entire careers, right? which is an amazing thing and something to celebrate. And yet, we are still faced with the principle that while that economic growth is no guarantee of a greater measure of shared prosperity, but it is a necessary precondition to it. So Heather, I would love to give you the first opportunity to talk about how in such a short period of time, the Biden administration has launched this robust industrial policy, this new economic paradigm. Talk to us a little bit about the Invest in America agenda, how it's different, and what the administration is trying to accomplish with these signature programs.
Thank you, and it is just such an honor to be here. I really enjoyed, Alan and Rip, your comments, and I love the theme of equitable growth, a topic near and dear to my heart, and so happy to be here to represent the White House today. So thank you, and I'm so excited to be able to be here with all of you. I was talking to Alan beforehand, and as a labor economist, I like to think of myself as, regional adjacent. Although I'm not a regional economist, I understand that all of these things take place in places across the country, and this is such an exciting agenda. So let me make 3.5 points to just ground us. When the president, the now president, ran for office, we talked a lot about the crises facing our economy and our society, and they've been mentioned here, right? We talked a lot about high inequality, low economic mobility. One of the guiding principles for the president was what I think there's this chart that the Economic Policy Institute has been producing for years. Think of it as a Larry Michel special that shows the growing gap between productivity and wages. And that indicated that there was something wrong for a long period of time in terms of inequality across all of these different metrics, but that one. Racial gaps across place, within workplaces across our society, the existential crisis of climate change, and of course, the lack of resiliency. And for many of us, I think that was just the final straw. During the pandemic, we couldn't deliver in the way that we needed to. And while all of these things had been building, and maybe we'd all seen them and we knew that this was a crisis, it was that final straw that really was like, this is not working. It's not working for capital. It's not working for labor. It's not working for communities. It's not working for families. And so during the campaign, the president was very clear during, and through the beginning years of governing, that we didn't just want to build back from that crisis. We wanted to build back better. And it's already been mentioned here, we wanted to change the paradigm. And so, when we were talking about it internally, we sort of made a vow to each other to not talk about getting back to normal, because normal, quite frankly, just wasn't good enough. And the president reiterated that time and time again. But this is an enormous challenge. If you have decades of underinvestment, decades of rising, mounting problems that are contributing to political polarization that makes things really hard, how do you pivot? Where do you start? Well, you start with a big, bold effort to revitalize America, to get us back on track. That's the American Rescue Plan. Then we had these 3 other bills that in our imaginations were one bill. They turned into 3. That's great. We'll take what we can get. Not everything made it through. There were some things that were left on the cutting room floor, and the president's been very clear through his actions and his words, through his budget, through executive orders, that is unfinished business. And here I'm implicitly referring to much of the CARE agenda that is not really the focus here today, but important to recognize that is still part of the agenda. But these 4 laws were designed together and designed to be implemented together. And I think that is the challenge facing communities, that they were put in place at different paces, they require collaboration across the federal government, and they require collaboration across communities in new ways. I want to just end my opening remark here with a big statement about what Bidenomics is, because we've been talking about it here in various ways, but the way that we are thinking about it, and I'm always open to feedback on this framing, because if you want to change the economic paradigm, you want to change how you're thinking about how you're investing in America, you have to change the words, you have to change the concept. So the way that we are thinking about it now is there are three core pillars and then a +1 at the bottom. So the first is that we're investing in America, all across America, right? That's what this legislation is doing, it's investing. But and we've made really clear decisions on what we need to invest in. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to invest in climate resiliency. And we need to invest and crowd in private capital in specific industries that are imperative for our national and economic security. High tech, semiconductors, clean energy. We have to build a clean energy economy. That's a new direction for the federal government. We have made strategic choices about what industries are important, and that's a countervailing to, we don't just care about growth, and we care about equity, but we also think that there are certain industries that are more important. Okay, so that's a big idea. The second is how we're investing. And there are two key components to that. One is that we're doing so through empowering and educating workers all across the country, working with folks like you in different places, right? So that's one core value. We need to bring people along. We need to address those longstanding equity issues as a part of what we're doing. And we need to do this in a way, which is the third pillar of Bidenomics, where we are shaping markets to be fair and competitive. The president has repeatedly said that capitalism without competition is exploitation. And this is one that is often underappreciated. If you're going to invest in specific industries, if you're going to invest in infrastructure, you need to make sure that that supports the kind of economy that you want to see. Are you shaping markets to be fair and competitive in a way that's going to deliver? So a new angle that I think we need to be thinking about, and that we need to be thinking about in a different way. And of course, we're doing all this through taxing wealth and not work. The president's been very clear about reducing deficits, but also making sure that we refocus the tax system on equity and fairness. So that's the big paradigm change and the big challenge to us all around the country to deliver on that. And I think the opening remarks really set that scene.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt it's a big challenge, but it also, I think, is represented, I think, for probably most people in the room, as a massive opportunity, right? Forcing to create new muscle memory and new collaborations that hopefully can transcend these individual programs and political cycles and carry communities forward into the future. Diane, I want to go to you because you're the director at U.S. Treasury of the Equity Hubs program. Maybe tell the audience a little bit about the Equity Hubs and what they are and how people in this room can use those programs to connect to the broad vision that Heather has outlined for the administration here.
Yeah, thank you. So the Equity Hub is a brand new part of Treasury. It's a permanent office, and I'm the only one in it right now. So I'm directing myself right now, but
you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I'm here. I showed up on time. It was created by the Counselor for Racial Equity at Treasury, Janice Bowdler, and it was her vision that on the equity agenda, which Janice's agenda is not just racial equity, I just want to underscore, even though that's her title. The intention is to make the equity agenda and the efforts to promote a more inclusive and resilient macroeconomy are not just a talking point for this administration, and are not just associated with the temporary rescue programs, but are part of what we want to be a lasting agenda for economic policy going forward past this administration. And so the Equity Hub will not have a single political appointee. I'm a career person. That's why it took me so long to get in the door, by the way. And we are trying to build a team of maybe 8 of us by next year. And we're trying to be the hub within Treasury through which all our learning happens about how effective our programs, our economic programs, have been at reaching the people that Secretary Yellen has explained are the necessary foundation, the first foundation for our economy. So when the Treasury, I will have to say the Treasury mission statement now has something that sounds less about purely macroeconomic strength, and it has the word inclusive in it. So our mission is to promote a strong, inclusive, and sustainable, and that means economically as well as environmentally sustainable economy. And that begins with making sure that we are including everyone in our policies and programs. We're reaching everyone, every nook and cranny of the economy. This is a challenge for Treasury to monitor because we're kind of used to monitoring big macro variables and not focusing on micro level outcomes, right? And so part of the Equity Hub's agenda is to, as a hub, bring together all the program and policy offices in Treasury and say, how can we share information that we touch on a daily basis and bring it together to have a better picture of how we are actually creating economic opportunity from the ground level up. So Bidenomics is often talked about as, you know, building the economy from the bottom up or the inside out or something like that, and middle out. And it's very much related to Secretary Yellen's concept of modern supply side economics, which we're actually in the process of trying to write a theoretical paper to explain that, like with equations and everything. But the idea of modern supply side economics is, instead of giving tax cuts to the richest people or to the biggest corporations and expecting it to trickle down and create jobs for people that may not have jobs right now, we are talking about getting dollars to the people first and growing it from the bottom up or from the middle out. And so we are working with, for example, the Office of Recovery Programs, which in Treasury was stood up quickly and is labeled the Office of Recovery Programs. So it is obviously designed to be a temporary office because those programs that they administer have expired already. But we're working with the Office of Recovery Programs within Treasury, for example, to help them with a learning agenda that they have established to, and maybe a lot of you in this room are actually familiar with the Office of Recovery Programs learning agenda because they posted it publicly and they're seeking public input ideas for how can we learn from our experience implementing all the temporary rescue programs that were part of the American Rescue Plan, that were things like the fully refundable, the expanded child tax credit. What can we learn about the success or failure of those programs to actually reach individuals that are part of our underserved communities, the untapped potential of our macro economy? We're working with the Inflation Reduction Act implementation team at Treasury. They're just starting to work on, implementing programs and also gathering data about how well they're reaching people, providing outreach and engagement strategies to get to the communities at an appropriate level so that we can make sure that we're including as many potential economic partners as we can. So this is a new way of looking at things that's designed to be lasting at Treasury, and so that we won't just be known as the financial capital department and the, throw out the money and just wait for the macro data to come back in the official statistics. And so, I'm hoping that we will engage with all these local communities and learn from all of you in terms of what is working, what is not, who needs to be reached more appropriately.
And I think the sort of whole of government approach makes all the sense in the world, right? As you're trying to do really difficult things, engaging all the different assets and agencies inside our federal apparatus. It's sort of like what you're asking all of us to do in our individual communities. Heather, I will say though, no good deed goes unpunished. So you and the administration help lead all this amazing legislation, more investment than most of us have ever seen. But inevitably, when you're trying to do big and bold things, to use the terms that you've described, there are challenges. If you were trying to implement any one of these initiatives in its own right, that alone would be a lot to digest and change to foist upon people, but we're doing all four simultaneously. Talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you either see or are seeing in communities that you foresee. I know just in conversations last night with folks at the reception, people are wondering, are these programs all designed to nest together and to stack? Are they designed to spread and reach every corner and community of America? And, the different timing and the phasing. Give us a lens in terms of what you're seeing in terms of some of the roadblocks and challenges maybe even ways in which you're hoping that, that communities will think differently about some of these opportunities?
Yeah, so that's a big question, and we don't have all day to talk about that, but I feel like we could
got
talk about
18
that.
minutes.
I know, exactly. So I want to sort of give some top lines. So let me just focus in on one piece of it that I think where you can see the through lines. I have been focusing a lot on the clean energy piece of it because you can see the through line from the environmental damage to communities, the need for different kinds of infrastructure, to what kinds of industries you're supporting, to what kinds of jobs. You can see those different pieces through all four pieces of legislation in one way. So let me just use that as a case study. I know it's specific and isn't going to touch everyone, but actually clean energy does touch us all, so bear with me on that. So as we're thinking about this, there are a series of challenges. I would say that there's one bucket that are structural challenges and one bucket that are more transitory potential headwinds, things that we're watching for. So one on structural challenges are some of the bread and butter. Can you set up the community to execute? Can you actually spend the money? The things that have already been mentioned. Then there's a whole host of challenges with putting in place new infrastructure or a new electricity grid around permitting and transmission lines. There's a whole host of community engagement questions and, again, sort of nuts and bolts. Can you do the investment in the way that you need to see it on the timelines that you need to do? What are the costs? Can you afford it in the first instance? All of those sorts of challenges, right? Those are structural challenges, and there's a timeline on this, not just because of the legislation, but also because there's an urgency to save the planet, right? We have this existential crisis going on in the background. But at the same time, there's also an urgency for communities to deal with these equity issues. So you have two different kinds of urgency that actually kind of push in different directions. So those are some structural challenges. Those are going to be challenges no matter when you do this or how you do this. On top of that, you have a series of, I would put them in the category of with my friend over here, macroeconomic headwinds, right? On the one hand, because of we're coming out of this pandemic recession, we know that we saw these supply chain challenges, and so that's one thing. Are you going to be able to get the stuff you actually need, the physical stuff to build the things that you need to build in a timely manner? You got to match up the supply and demand. That's a headwind. No individual has control over that, right? These are global supply chains. How do you think about operating? How do you think about building quickly for the health of the planet and for your community and before the dollars run out, given the supply chain challenges that we've been experiencing? Okay, that adds a new layer. You might need to talk to new people. You might need to bring in new experts to help you with that, and we're thinking about that a lot here, and happy to take questions on that. Another challenge is finance, capital. We're trying to crowd in private dollars, and we are very proud of our maps on invest.gov that show that we've crowded in over $500 billion of new private dollars in investments all across the country. This is very exciting. Okay, but you need to make sure that's working in the right direction, that it's that is in partnership with those communities. Is that enough money? Right? And with higher interest rates, that's a headwind. Some of these projects are now going to be more costly because of some of the supply chain and inflation issues, and they're more costly because of higher interest rates. Okay, golly, what do we do about that? How do we think about this different macroeconomic environment? And then finally, the third one, which I often hear the most about, I spent yesterday connecting with business leaders on semiconductors, and almost to a one, they all want to talk about workforce. Everybody wants to talk about workforce. This is often seen as a speed bump. I think this is an opportunity. So I want to flip the script on that one, right? We've got people all across America that want and need good jobs. We've got people all across the country that want the skills, but we have a fundamental new challenge. I'm going to end my comments with this one. We're doing government differently. We are trying to focus private capital to move in different directions, and we're trying to empower communities. Well, that means that I don't have the data. That means I can't tell you where the jobs are going to be or what the skills are, because we're trying to empower all of you and a bunch of businesses. So we don't have the infrastructure at the federal level to track that. I mean, that's not the way this works. Well, that's a new, I think of it as an economist, this is an exciting opportunity of a lifetime. So, right? So we need to create new ways of pulling that data in. We may need more from you because we may need to know what's happening at the local level in a new way. How do we aggregate that up? How do we tell this story? What I'm hearing is a lot of panic from people. Oh my gosh, where are we going to get the workers? I'm like, workers, there's a lot of humans. They all want good jobs. That's the problem, is how are you going to communicate to the community colleges, the universities, the high schools about what kinds of skills you need for this new economy? That is your challenge. Maybe that's a workforce challenge, but I actually think that's an us problem, not a worker problem. So this is my new take on this. I'm previewing this here. I've not talked about this in this way in other venues, but I hope that this is a receptive audience for thinking about that challenge differently, but also the data that we need and how we're going to work with private actors to get that information.
No, I love the reframing of the challenge and the opportunity. It certainly resonates. Certainly, I know with us. I'm sure with many in the room. You talked about data, Diane. Maybe I'll come back to you because I think one of the things that stands out from the sort of boldness and the ambition of this set of policy prescriptions is that many of these programs will take years to fully evaluate, right? To understand the long-term impact. I just think about the project that we're working on in Central New York that is supported by Chips and Science, the big Micron semiconductor fab, right? This has a 20-year life cycle to its maximum economic output. In a short-term, somewhat political environment, how are you and the administration thinking about gathering data, measuring progress, being able to demonstrate and communicate the effectiveness of what is ultimately billions upon billions of dollars in federal spending designed to achieve these specific outcomes that might be on a slightly longer horizon than the political cycle?
Right. So even though you're talking about like benefits that might take many years to see in fruition, I think that we have to follow the money in real time. Basically, we have to do a better job about tracing where the funds are being distributed at the ground level. This is something, in other words, instead of just taking macro data that we might typically use to make points and analyze the effectiveness of programs, we have to start with administrative data and people data, like experiences at the ground level in terms of people, communities that are being served by these programs. People that are coming for help with filing for the child tax credit, for example, like understanding how they got to the office they got to, what the obstacles were for them to find out that they were eligible for an expanded credit, and obstacles for them actually applying and filing taxes to get those benefits. I think we have to, as economists, we do have to understand the very micro level, granular, one person at a time experience, because that is a much more reliable way of building up to what is the macro impact of this program, how good of a job did it do, rather than, and this is going on at Treasury, we are also trying the opposite strategy of starting with aggregated data and trying to disaggregate it. But I'm trying to push for both. We're working from the top down and the bottom up in terms of data strategies, right? So I think like if my mission in the Equity Hub, leading the Equity Hub, is successful at Treasury, there will be a bunch of new ways that the economists in the building actually study the impact of Treasury policies and programs. It's challenging though, because the economics profession as a whole is not very good at measuring the economy for one person at a time. We're very bad at that. It turns out most economists don't really like to talk to people. And that's why the Equity Hub will be staffed with an interdisciplinary team, and there's not a single position that will be on my staff with the title economist. Nothing against economists, I'm an economist, but we are not hiring people because they have a PhD in economics. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, well, that's the applause.
that sort of it resonates in a lot of respects, not the least of which is I had a COO once who said, he said, they're not people, they're just numbers. And needless to say, he's not our COO anymore. So
Oh my gosh.
let's, I think you mentioned, Heather, at the beginning that there were components of the legislative package that didn't move, right? And as we think about how we continue to maximize the benefits of the programs there's also this coalition of stakeholders, I think, probably in this room and well beyond, who now have a taste of what an engaged federal government, what an active industrial policy, what a competitiveness agenda could mean for the economic future of the places that we all either grew up in or the places that we chose to call home, right? The places that we love. And I would just love to hear from both of you if there's a particular example or a thought of a piece of the agenda that hasn't yet been realized that you feel like is critically important in the long term, just from a policy standpoint. What else should we be thinking about and looking at in the future?
I'll take that. I mean, I think I'm gonna make 3 points on that. Let's see. So I think this was a historic set of achievements, much of it bipartisan. And I think one question in front of us is, where do we go next? How much is needed in the next iteration? What does that next iteration look like? And so one question I have is, do we need further big, or is this about building these ideas into the regular order of business year after year, the regular budget? I mean, these are just big questions. Like, how do we think about those next steps? And what is best for the folks on the ground that are implementing, right? We did need this big infusion. We didn't need this big reboot. Now that we've done that, is the best way to continue on this path, to continue to do we still need to move the ship? Or do we need to just stay the course? And how do we think about that politically? And that gets to a second point, which is people need to hear from us about the importance of this, that this is working. I talk to folks all the time. I talk to business leaders. I talk to people around the country who are really excited about this. And then I look at the polls, and I'm a little confused about what the American public is hearing about what this Invest in America agenda is doing, how it's resonating in communities. In my one-on-one conversations with people, across the country, they're seeing these investments, but it's not then redounding onto a sense that the economy is moving in the right direction. I'm curious, like, what you all are thinking about that, how you are communicating that, because those two things need to be paired, right? If we like what this is and this direction is, then we need to be communicating about it. And then the third, on the unfinished business, we've been tracking very closely what we know already about the progress. And one of the things we've seen, for example, is that as we've created clean energy jobs, actually the majority of them have been going to women. And people don't really seem to know that. This is not an agenda that is just for men's jobs or just for some kinds of people's jobs in some parts of the country. It's actually quite an inclusive agenda, and I think we haven't done a good enough job communicating that. At the same time, we made historic investments in childcare through the American Rescue Plan that are now have faded away. When the House passed their version of the now I'm blanking on what we were calling it that month, but the the American Jobs Plan, or what the family, whatever, with the, gosh, I am totally blanking. At any rate, so when they passed that, there was a fulsome agenda around care, around child care, around early pre-K, around home care, around paid leave, and yet that didn't make it through the Senate. But the fact that it passed the House should give us a lot of information about how popular it was, how important it was. All of those elements continued to be in the president's budget last year at that fulsome level. But we know for these jobs to work for people and communities, you have to deal with the fact that everybody can't hold a job. There are little people who need care, there are aging people who need care, there are disabled people who need care, and every family struggles with this. And so making sure that we're thinking about that and recognizing that for those care businesses, it's kind of impossible, and I dare each and every one of you to get out your Excel and try to come up with a business plan for those businesses that provides humane and safe care at a price point that families can afford. If you can't do that, then we need, our plan was to subsidize those businesses, make it possible for them to run effective businesses, but we need to keep having that conversation. How can we support these businesses? And by the way, if we care about equity, and you care about women-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses, particularly by women, you have to care about this sector. This has to be a part of your industrial strategy because these are the kinds of businesses that are disproportionately run by women and particularly women of color.
And
Diane?
I would say that, that's one of the biggest parts of our economy that is untapped, are all the mostly women that are not able to work because they have a lot of childcare responsibilities, and they can't, the market is basically a failure because it's too expensive and yet wages are terrible. So I was going to point out that there's the messaging issue is related to the data issue. It's like when we talk about how well the Biden economic agenda is doing, we tend to emphasize the aggregate statistics, right? Or how many dollars were handed out in aggregate, right, from a program. That and the term equity, I'll have to say, has made it a politically polarized issue when it is not a polarizing issue from a practical one person at a time standpoint. Before this job, I was the policy director of the House Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. The Republicans didn't want to call it by its proper name. They don't like the term equity. If I'm the director of the Equity Hub and there's a new Republican administration, I'm pretty sure my job, at least the title of my office, will change, and I'll get subsumed under some economic policy office. But I think that the reason why, I think that there's some terminology matters, it turns out. I learned this trying to write a report with the Republicans. Words matter and labels matter, and there's always a way to misunderstand what the goal is. And I think the more we can emphasize that the Biden economic agenda is about maximizing our full economic potential, getting all of our untapped potential to be realized, and that is something that benefits everyone, truly, like without talking about redistribution. It benefits the whole economy and therefore everyone's economic success. I think the more we can start talking about that and the more we can tell individual stories rather than put out the aggregate statistics, the more this agenda is likely to be sustainable beyond this administration. And so I think we have to start thinking about how do we relabel this? How do we make it not seem like an us versus them or a zero-sum game? How do we use words that bring in everyone instead of, making people retreat to corners?
Can I make
Heather,
one comment?
we've got 60 seconds left, but it sounds like you want to have the last word, so
No,
it's
no,
all
just
yours.
a half comment on this. I think it's really important that what Diane emphasized, that this is a growth agenda.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's been the theme here, but I just wanted to make sure that that was underscored. This is a growth agenda. It's a growth with equity. It makes sure that we're delivering for people all across the country, but we also do need to talk about it as a growth agenda.
Right.
I think that's a great summation. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Diane, to a great panel and obviously a lot of great work. I know next up we've got a short video that's going to be highlighting how city leaders are leveraging the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, thank you, for transformative investments in public safety initiatives. Brookings Metro Senior Research Associate Hannah Love, who you'll see in the video, has been doing great work assessing how these investments can not only address the pandemic-era spike in gun violence, but also support thriving and healthy communities in the long term. So please roll the video.
The U.S. has long had a public health crisis of gun violence. That is nothing new. What we saw is that during the pandemic, it just went into a completely new territory. The pandemic took away a lot of those things that keep people safe within their communities, community centers, people's ability to go to their jobs, and also people's ability to just interact with one another. And in 2020, we did actually witness the single largest increase in homicides that we've seen since the FBI began tracking data in 1960. What we found when we looked at the data, though, is that there was really an increase in gun violence in neighborhoods where gun violence was already bad to begin with, rather than a widespread dispersal of gun violence across cities. So we found that in those neighborhoods that either were historically redlined or had a history of systemic disinvestment, they tended to have high rates of gun violence concentrate both pre and post-pandemic. The reason that gun violence prevention and intervention is included in ARPA often gets missed. The same communities that bore the brunt of the burden of the public health and economic impacts of the pandemic are these exact same communities that saw the rise in gun violence. So we're really seeing a convergence of two crises happening within the same communities at the same time.
It's been 2 years since the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act. ARPA dollars provided a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance sustainable, equitable economic growth. The funds were instrumental in our ongoing fight against violence.
With ARPA funding, the City of Chicago created the Chicago Recovery Plan. The investments were targeted towards neighborhoods most impacted by decades of disinvestment that were both hardest hit in the pandemic and more vulnerable to violence and economic hardship.
An example of a Chicago program that was supported by ARPA funding was the Chicago Resilient Communities Pilot. This was the City of Chicago's Guaranteed Income Pilot program, giving 5,000 eligible low-income Chicagoans and families $500 per month for 12 months with no strings attached.
Our dominant approach to public safety has often been to sort of police the markers and the symptoms of neighborhood disinvestment without really thinking about how to transform the neighborhood conditions that cause people to experience gun violence on a daily basis. The American Rescue Plan really acknowledged that our status quo approaches haven't always been working. It made room for sort of these innovations that evidence really backs that shows that we can reduce gun violence. It explicitly makes those allowable uses and gives local leaders the creativity that maybe they haven't had before.
Baltimore's struggle with a disease known as gun violence is our longest standing public health issue. The president blessed us with $640 million of ARPA funds. We are using that investment by doing, for the first time ever in our city, a comprehensive violence reduction plan that encompasses all things related to reducing violence.
Many of these community safety investments that we're talking about require the participation of people outside of the formal criminal justice field to implement, and they require anyone who views their job as place-based, whether that be economic or community development, to incorporate safety and community safety as part of their job.
We know that every single Baltimorean, police, government, elected officials, the churches, the mosques, synagogues, everybody has a responsibility as businesses to help us reduce violence. But if we're going to do it, it has to be done in partnership with community partners.
We recognize that we cannot police our way out of this problem, and a local government can't do it alone. One of the biggest drivers we've seen related to safety and violent crime has been the lack of real local financial support to address mental health.
So while we're doing things like 911 call diversion, taking folks who are actual mental health people and having them do those responses, allowing our police officers to focus on what they do best, while we also build that community work of how we can deal with each other and better in resolving our conflicts, how we can have people who are credible messengers go out and disrupt those conflicts.
There really is a need to move away from these reactive approaches and towards transformative investments in the community level infrastructure. Things as simple as adding streetlights and painting sidewalks can reduce gun violence.
Destination Crenshaw is 6 pocket parks and a 1.3-mile cultural infrastructure project on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles. We have over 100 public arts commissions from Black local artists. We have 43 Black businesses, the largest Black business corridor on the West Coast. Public safety plays a major role in what we're doing at Destination Crenshaw just by the transition of a disinvested and blighted community to a community that is thriving. All of our programming is based on how we uplift the creative economy through our artists. The culture of Black LA is something that we want people to see and acknowledge and hopefully utilize our businesses to really drive our economics forward. We tie it to our pride and our hope for our community and ultimately create a shared way of actually caring for the place that we're at. I talk about it as a cultural infrastructure project because the infrastructure of our community are our vital aspects. They're everything that touch our quality of life. And we sometimes get caught up in concrete and steel when really it's the human element that actually makes the safety things happen.
The investments that we're seeing come out of places like Cleveland and Baltimore, Chicago and LA, they're showing that it's possible to invest in these non-traditional root cause approaches and see results from it.
We started in the Western District, our most historically violent district. In the first year of implementation, they saw a over 30% reduction. And now, with the partnership coming from the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, we're even more excited about how Baltimore and every other city can expand this work with the support of our federal government.
Studies have shown that there have been a major decrease in violence in areas where we've layered federal dollars with our investments from the city and philanthropy. Investing in community violence intervention and prevention is a worthwhile and transformative use of federal dollars that will ultimately lead to safer, equitable, and thriving communities.
We used over $10 million of ARPA funds to create one of the nation's first ever neighborhood safety endowment funds to give our city nearly 2 decades of a permanent source of revenue to invest in the proven interventions that we know that can reduce crime all across our city.
The systemic disinvestment that had happened in our community needed to actually be matched with the opportunity to create an environment that really served a better use of the investment in making sure that it stayed in our local community.
And I think the key lesson here is for the vast majority of cities and counties that did not invest in community violence intervention, to take a look at what's going on in Destination Crenshaw, to see the investments that are happening in the south and west sides of Chicago, and to really look at the fact that it's not only improving safety outcomes, it's improving community well-being and community health at large.
So we have the privilege now of continuing with this theme of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars and how they are supporting communities. To start, we're going to hear from Assistant Secretary Alejandro Castillo, the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Commerce for Economic Development. And then afterward, we're going to take some time to speak through how local communities and state leaders are using the resources from the Build Back Better Regional Challenge to create a difference in their communities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alejandro.
Good morning, or as they say in my household, buenos dias. This is a great room of so many amazing friends. Friends, but also people who are in the trenches as we speak. As to how do we actually implement this. I see Rodney Sampson in the room as well, and so many others. Let me just take a step back. I know we are a little bit behind time, so I want to be mindful of the time. But I want to anchor us, right? Just down the block, literally down the block, is the U.S. Department of Commerce. And within that very large building are 13 different agencies, and we are all very much involved, as to what Heather Boucher mentioned, on all 4 of these massive transformational legislations. I'm here to talk about EDA, the Economic Development Administration in particular, but I have to also recognize my other bureaus within Commerce that are doing incredible work. Census is part of Commerce, and the Census Bureau and EDA are working very closely to do just what was mentioned, to figure out that data component. National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, as you may know, is really at the forefront of the CHIPS and Science Act, in particular the semiconductor issues. I also have to recognize NTIA, National Telecommunication and Information Administration, which has the task of $48 billion for broadband. I give you that context, and I also have to mention NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is at the forefront of so much of what's happening with regards to resiliency and climate change. But I wanted to give you that context because even though sometimes it feels like we can't quite follow what the federal government is doing, there is a reason to this madness. There are attempts and engagement to really weave through what we need to do in order to strongly build communities. And that's the exciting part. Thank you, Rip, for your comments, because I really liked what you said, which was building a civic framework of mutually assumed responsibilities. And that's exactly what we all have to do. And it's great to have philanthropy in the room and the private sector in the room, because even though it sounds like a lot of money, it really isn't. We've had decades upon decades of disinvestments. You know, I grew up in a community not too dissimilar to what was shown in New York City in the 1970s. And as a child, I was puzzled, like, why is my community left behind? What do I need to do? Why me? Why us? And I think this moment in time is addressing that. It's making sure that we can actually build that inclusive economy that we all want to do. So just a couple of things. I can't thank enough Brookings. You all have been a tremendous partner. Amy and Zev and Mark and Tony and so many others. You have been journeying with us in so many ways, and also being a true advocate of EDA. For those of you who may not know, EDA was traditionally a very small agency, $400 million. Think about it, $400 million for the size and scope and complexity of the challenges that confront us as a nation. And only most recently have we actually been able to leverage the dollars necessary to deploy across the country. And that is my warning. Economic development cannot be episodic. It has to be long-term, and it has to be sustainable. It has to be relentless, because we need to make sure that all corners of our great nation are engaged and involved. Now, I'm here to talk about the Build Back Better, and I have to give a huge shout out to my colleague, Alex Jones, who's in the back and has been incredible. We have an amazing team at EDA, and very quickly, you know, the American Rescue Plan provided EDA with $3 billion. And that was a feat, because not only was it, what do we do? How do we reimagine how government intervenes in these programs, and how do we design it? But it was also about scaling the talent, scaling the breadth and reach. We did that very quickly. We have an amazing secretary, Secretary Raimundo, who basically said, you have to do this in 1 year. And we did. But we did it with, I believe, with an attention to being very thoughtful. And Ashley Swearingen is here, who I admire Ashley very, very much, a former mayor, but now leading one of our Build Back Better awardees. You know, the way we designed it was a two-step process. And the reason we did so is because we wanted to make sure that we weren't too overburdensome. We wanted at least to get that initial concept and ideas. We received 529 applications for a $1 billion grant pool. From there, we paired it back to 60 finalists, and we awarded 21. Now, I have to say, the oversubscription was enormous, and I would love to see another Build Back Better, because what's happening on the ground is truly transformational. It was also embedded in that program, the concept of partnerships. You had to come together, and many folks would say to me, you know, we've known each other, we've kind of worked together, but we've never really had to come together and imagine our economic future. And I'm sure Ashley will tell you more about what's happening in Fresno. But that was step one. The other part that was very important was the equity. It was baked in. It's been baked into every grant that we have right now at EDA. It is important. It's one of our investment priorities, equity. Not just to check the box, truly testing what does equity mean. And I will tell you that we've gotten such incredible responses, even from those who did not get the dollars, where they have said to us, you know, we didn't win, but we're staying together and we're putting it, you know, moving forward with the help of philanthropy. I also have to acknowledge Scott Andes, who's also in the room, an amazing individual who worked very tirelessly on Build Back Better and now is working on another program, which I have to also mention, and that is the Recompete pilot program. And for those of you who are tracking, we're in the midst of the program, so I won't talk too much other than to say, really focusing on highly distressed areas with prime age employment gaps, prime age defined 25 to 54. And that is going amazing. Here's what I want to end with, because I want to be sensitive to the next panel. EDA now has the ability, because of the breadth of all of the different programs that we have, to actually be much more able to tailor our intervention to the needs of community. And that is remarkable. I just pray that not only this administration, but Congress will continue to keep an eye on how important it is to make sure that we're addressing all communities in unique ways. I will also say, because I have to say it, EDA has not been reauthorized in almost 20 years. And we need new tools, we need modern tools to make sure that we tailor those responses. In conclusion, we are also in the midst of tech hubs, and that's all I will say. But again, it's so exciting. It is so exciting. I believe in government. It is not the solution to everything, but it is an incredible tool that we must be part of. And this work is also about our democracy. It is about our democracy because when you make sure that people are engaged, when they feel and they recognize that they're seen, that they're not forgotten, that they're not dismissed, it makes them much more engaged in the future of our nation. This is the first time that EDA actually is straddling both national economic development with national security as well. And I leave you with that in light of what's happening around the world. Let's make sure that as we continue this work, we are also thinking about what does it mean, not just in terms of the economy, but also about our democracy and our national security. So thank you very much.
So now we get to spend some time speaking with some of the folks who are tasked with applying for and implementing this very innovative type of program that the Assistant Secretary has mentioned. So I'd like to welcome to the stage two folks that we have a lot of deep respect for at the Kresge Foundation. The first is Elena Chavez-Quezada. Elena is the Senior Advisor for Social Innovation in the Office of Governor Gavin Newsom. Welcome. And I fear that Ashley has already been introduced. Ashley Swearingen is the former mayor of the city of Fresno and the Central Valley Community Foundation, where she currently is the CEO and president, was the lead applicant for the Fresno Merced Future of Food Initiative application for the Build Back Better Regional Challenge. Welcome, Ashley. I was instructed to also say who I am. My name is Chantal Rashtabi. I'm the Managing Director of the American Cities Program at the Kresge Foundation, and we're here because we have a long and deep partnership with the Brookings Metro team and the capabilities and support that they offer to cities, and we also believe in working very, very deeply with leaders like you in your communities who we know really make things happen. So good to be here. So success for me for this panel means that we will all leave knowing what happened in Fresno and Merced that led to their award, what it took to do that, which there's a lot of story in there, and then what lessons both the community but also the state have learned from this. And frankly, as Rip said about implementation, what's next? So I want to start with you, Ashley. Could you tell us a little bit about your vision and your team's vision for the proposal? And also what you really would articulate to this group as the core strengths of the coalition that put together the proposal.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see all of you, and so grateful to be here. It is it's really significant for us in the Central Valley in California to be convened by both Brookings and Kresge because and this isn't just a shameless plug for you all, but the role that these two organizations have played in even getting our region to this place is really a big deal. I was just chatting with Alan in 2005. He published a report called Katrina's Window that spotlighted the racial segregation and the economic segregation in Fresno as the highest concentration of poverty of any other large city in the United States and the most spatially segregated. Not New Orleans, but Fresno. And that was at a time in 2005 when we were already kind of busy trying to figure out, like, God, things kind of really stink here. Like, well, how do we make things different? So anyway, this has been a very long journey, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that in a second. But the vision for our proposal, and I'm joined by the amazing partners that are around the table for F3, University of California at Merced, UC A&R. We've got folks here from the Community Foundation, from Merced College. I mean, like the entire world of the Central Valley has worked together on this proposal. But the vision was to, number one, recognize our base economy as food production. That kind of matters. Two, the state to the nation to the world, we produce 25% of the nation's food supply. I mean, this is a fundamentally critical region for all of the U.S., but has largely been cloaked by like secrecy, darkness, no one knows we exist, all this kind of stuff. We're hunkered down, delivering high quality, low cost food for everybody and bearing the burden, both economically and environmentally. And so realizing that just like having this flat tire economy for decades is really the root of so many problems, our vision was, well, we can't stop doing that, but how do we do this sustainably, and how do we do this in a way that is inclusive and centers equity, and how do we add economic value to the process? So that was the vision, literally 20 plus years in the making of trying to get all the pieces right. And I would say, like, when we first started on this journey, you know, the kind of the message from our business community was just get everything out of the way to let us keep doing what we're already doing, because it's working for us and people have to eat. Like, that's been the sort of heartbeat of the business community from this region. And after some time and agitation and that sort of thing, many of us in the civic sector started saying, well, look, it's not working for everybody, so we have to do something different. So then that kind of switched to, all right, well, let's figure out precision agriculture, and let's figure out the mechanics, the machinery, the technology, and then it's gonna make that possible. We went down that path for a while without community. And it was like sort of farmers and growers and then folks from the business sector going like, oh, we can do this together. Got a little bit further down the path, still really terrible results and terrible outcomes, actually getting worse in our region. The third and final component, I would say, over the last 15 years has been this growing capacity for community leaders, grassroots residents, farm worker organizations, and others to say, like, hey, wait a second, this is why it's not working, you're leaving us out. And so bringing all of those things together is ultimately what we were able to package in our application. And I know I've got to just stop talking, but all I can say is every step of the way, as a just sort of young staffer at one point, like, hey, this is what other regions are doing. I'm reading stuff from Brookings. We have to be innovation focused. It must be something like this. And thinking, we're just one step away. If we just had a business incubator, everything's gonna be fine. It's like, oh, we have a business incubator, things aren't fine. You know, anyway, learning from all these other regions and then realizing like it really does take all of these things coming together to stand a chance at shifting a place like Fresno in the Central Valley. It might be easier in other regions that start farther along. But for us, we have no choice, have had no choice, but to really pick up every single piece of our civic regional infrastructure and to try to move forward together.
Yeah, and one of the things that, you know, we've observed your team do over the years is that you don't just add together a hyphenate of every word or buzzword about what should be happening in economic development, but you really have taken the time to think through what are all the different components, how do we combine them in a new way? So kudos to you and the team. So one thing I think that, you know, we talked about with the state of California, it's very exciting that you all have provided an additional $15 million from your American Rescue Plan local recovery funds to the Future of Food initiative. So I wanted to ask you as well, Elena, from the state's perspective, what was attractive about this proposal to you all? What does this signify that makes it very worthy of investment?
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And I think you just heard it. It's pretty clear, just the leadership that we had in Fresno and the decades really of work. I want to recognize this one really celebratory moment, given how many difficult moments in this journey there are, when the Fresno team met with the governor and presented this plan. And it was, I will admit, was not there, but I feel like I was, because it was legendary. It was perfectly orchestrated, and community voice, as Ashley just mentioned, was really, really front and center. There was even a personalized T-shirt for the governor at the end of it, which went over really well. But you know, behind that is decades of tenacious and really, really hard work. So I think what made this really compelling for the state is it's clear that the Fresno community, with Ashley's leadership and bringing people together, had done that hard work, had stuck with it over years and years and years. I think the relentless focus on results and having a process that is moving towards progress was also a really big value add, and something that was really compelling to the governor. And then, as we've heard throughout the morning, this ecosystem, and I think, Ashley, your role as one of the builders of this ecosystem and bringing so many diverse voices so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And then the next thing I just want to say is that philanthropy played a really important role here. My role within the state in the governor's office is working on public-private partnerships, really leveraging philanthropic dollars and expertise and non-financial assets as well to help us achieve our shared goals. And philanthropy invested with Kresge, the Irvine Foundation, Power Team, you know, years of capacity. And it's not necessarily the sexiest thing for philanthropy to invest in, but if you want a return on investment, I would say that's where it's at. It is long, patient capital. And part of what philanthropy unlocked was the ability for Fresno to have that genuine community input. So it was not a check the box kind of process. It was meaningful. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of resources, both for the conveners with Ashley's leadership, but for community partners themselves. And so I would say, you know, the state just jumped in all the way. There was an initial $3 million for seed planning, followed by $30 million of seed investment, and then $15 million for the Ag Tech Workforce Program. And in addition to the dollars, though, there's some non-financial assets that I just wanted to say. One is we had incredible champions within the state that were moving this forward. So Lenny Mendonca, the governor's chief economic and business advisor at the time, tirelessly kind of fought for Fresno and made sure this was front and center. We had Derek Kirk, somewhere here in the audience, who's with the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, went with the Fresno delegation to DC to advocate for this. That's how bought in that the state was. And then finally, the establishment of a nonprofit collaborative, a kind of entity with the state directing all of the assets under its control to this multi-sector entity, and that has staying power. That will exist way beyond this opportunity.
That's awesome. And in a second, I want to ask you more about if you live in a state that doesn't have that excitement about this type of initiative, what your advice would be to people in the room to how to make that case, and is it more than making a case? Like, what do you specifically need to do? So tee that up. But I guess I want to start first with this space in between having a good heart and good spirit and good vision for the work and how you really get this done. Amy always calls this the civics of the work. Can you tell us a little bit more what preconditions already existed in Fresno? You said it's 10, 20 years. What already existed?
Yeah.
And what did you have to create or do differently?
Okay, so look. First of all, I know exactly what it's like to do this work in a state that is not enthusiastic about this, because let's go back 25 years. I mean, this Newsom administration, this is like pinch me moments all the time. I can't believe this. Like, the region we come from in California, we are overshadowed by the Bay Area, by LA. Like, this is just an enormous place. We have done our own communities and our own selves such a disservice by being so satisfied with where we were, being stuck. I mean, you know, the folks who are in charge of stuff, to indict leaders of the past, which, you know, they're not here, so I'll do that. But, you know, like, there just was such joy and appreciation for being so mediocre. And I can't begin to tell you how important mindset is in a local community. It started for us in Fresno, and then of course it's expanded, and now in a multi-county kind of way, thanks in large part to the Newsom administration. But we were so satisfied with like just being okay. You know, like my folks are all right, so I'm not worried about anything else. And it really, really honestly did take two things. First of all, local leaders who were not attached to the land-based economy. So developers were doing fine, farmers were doing fine, or at least they were always fighting to do fine, and they had power. So the folks who were not tied to the land, and they were like accountants and doctors, and they were manufacturers, and our CEO roundtable, that group really in the 90s started calling the question about it's not okay. And particularly as the rest of California was experiencing the greatest economic expansion at the time in 100 years because of the proliferation of information technology, the equipment, the services, et cetera. So all that's happening around us, nothing is moving. In fact, things are getting worse. And there's this shift in this mindset. A portion of the business community started to like kind of raise a question. And we had to, I was a junior staffer. I would bring like the, water and cookies to these meetings and take notes and learning so much. And we had to meet in secret. We had like this little conference room at the local Deloitte office that we would meet every week. So that was a big thing. Is it took a couple of civic-minded CEOs and then a university president who wasn't from the region and who wasn't tied and was kind of like this outside, like, do y'all know this isn't like right the way this is going here? And then the second thing, and I think obviously related, these folks were interested in outside information. And literally the think tank world and EDA published this amazing booklet. I wonder if anybody in this room has ever even heard of it. I'm looking at Derek, he's an encyclopedia. Jennifer Montana produced a handbook for EDA about how to drive innovation-based economies in the early 2000s. You know what I'm talking about, Scott? Do you really? Okay, so anyway, these kinds of tools were coming forward. The federal government was saying hey, these things are the way it works to increase prosperity, et cetera. Alan's report, literally this information was coming out, and there were people on the ground who were like, wait a second, we've been on an island and this has to change. So mindset of locals and then this outside information that was coming in started many, many other layers, and a couple decades later, we land here.
So I find it hard to believe that you had data and you brought it to people and suddenly they were like, okay, we'll do something different. I mean, what?
Well, there was only 5 or 6 people that were paying attention to the data.
Helped.
But they were people who had enough of a presence in the community to start raising awareness about these issues. And it was politically extremely difficult because at the time, all the political power was just as long as farmers are happy and get the water to the farmers, and then we're going to be okay. And so yeah, there are a lot of relationships broken. There are a lot of struggles. We have a way in Fresno, our local political scene is hand-to-hand combat. It is very, very juvenile. We are really good at it. And it just took people having the fortitude, the thick skin, and I'd say really the stewardship of the future to be able to push through that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that goes back to what you were mentioning earlier about risk. It would be very comfortable to maintain friendly and nice relationships that are quite comfortable, but time and time again, how do you push through that, and how is it uncomfortable? I'm sure nobody in the audience has experienced that. So let's go to the state piece a little bit. What besides the fact that Governor Newsom has really great hair, What, like, what, if you're in a state and you're like, people are not receptive, what do you feel like moved the needle on that in California versus prior administrations? What really has to happen to make people see that vision and invest in it?
Well, I think part of it is the governor's kind of unapologetic focus on regional economic development. So we've heard a lot today about bottom up or center out. And I think that's a paradigm shift. That is really, not shying away from that and encouraging leadership at all levels of government and philanthropy to say, this is where the work is at. This is where we need to focus our energy, especially in a state as diverse as California. There's no other way, really, if you want to be effective. I think also, encouraging philanthropy and kind of building off some really amazing models with the Kresge Foundation and Irvine and so many others to invest in capacity. It is a shame that we have all of these public dollars flowing, and then I meet with the 7 mayors in Imperial Valley, 7 small cities, and none of them have the capacity to access it. It is a shame. And so this, to me, is one of the biggest places where philanthropy can step up and is stepping up. I think there's a lot for all of us to do in this space, but the fact that we can't connect the dots and that you have to have capacity and resources to unlock capacity and resources, that's the cycle that we have to break. And I think that we all play an important role there, and including philanthropy in the state.
Can I follow up on that? Because I think sometimes philanthropy is like very obtuse, and it's hard, like what do they actually do? I get asked that a lot. So you've been all over the state working with regions on this. What have you seen? Like, what do people need to go ask philanthropy for? I'm hearing long-term capacity, so that's like sounds like staffing, investing in the data. But as you think about the different regions and what philanthropy's done to support them, what would you suggest the audience ask their local philanthropy for?
That's a great question. I would say that philanthropy, what's happening in California through a program called CME, the California Economic Mobilization Initiative, is getting out capacity building grants to small grassroots organizations around the state so that they have the tools that they need to even know what's available, assess whether that's the right opportunity for them, assess whether they have the bandwidth to implement should they be successful. So I think, dollars to support grassroots organizations, but back to my trip to Imperial Valley, it's not just the grassroots organizations. I mean, it was so clear to me with these 7 mayors and 7 city managers how much they know needs to be done, how equipped they are to do some of the actual work, and this distance between the dollars and their ability to access them is so huge. So I think investing in grassroots community, investing in local government and its ability to access those dollars. And then I think it's the work that, we heard today. It's just like consistent capacity building, supporting the Central Valley Community Foundations of the world to do all of that hard kind of grassroots organizing and bringing folks together.
That makes sense. And it's interesting the parallel strategies that can happen in communities, I think, where a certain set of actors are actually moving a certain thing forward, but then looking at the 10, 20-year plan, what's the capacity that needs to be built for the next thing? And how do you get different people in the game playing those different roles? Philanthropy being up the rear on some of those longer-term groups. So that makes a lot of sense.
And I think what we have now, too, is we can build on the infrastructure that we have, and it'll outlast any of these public dollars right now. This is an entity that will stand the test of time, and so it is the long version that we're looking at.
All right, so I want to go to, we live in a moment where we're worried about implementation, where we are implementing. I want to go to Ashley for a minute. What do you see as the challenges that lay ahead, and how are you thinking about confronting those? And then Alina, I mean, it's not just local regions that are innovating, your state is innovating. So if you could say a word about how the administration is thinking about organizing itself to adapt to these challenges.
Well, I think it's already been touched on, I think, a bit, but like the challenge to implementation is things that are stood up quickly to access an immediate opportunity. I mean, that's cotton candy. It tastes good, it's going to dissolve in your mouth. It's not going to last. So we have to hold this tension around. If you're a local or regional leader, civic operator, et cetera, we all hear all the time, get the money out, spend it, spend it, spend it. And those things are true. And it is really important. The people who are saying that and their objectives matter, and these dollars need to be spent well. So I'm not asking for any of the volume to be turned down on that. We all get it. There's a clock on these dollars. However, those of us who work at the local and regional level, we are the stewards of our places. And no matter what other people's deadlines are for our communities, we have to hold the space for whatever it takes. No matter how long it takes, we will be here. We are building this for the long haul. And if we bring that attitude into our work, and if we can calm everybody down at our local level with this one simple message, that I promise you, when you are ready and when you have really built something that can float, the dollars will be there. And you can't anticipate right now where those dollars might come from, but you just have to trust that investment-ready and investment-worthy proposals, just like in the private sector or in the public sector, they will also attract capital in the civic arena. And so it's that just managing that expectation and tension of like, if we don't do this right now, it will never happen. That can't be true. That cannot be true. And realizing that, okay, if a piece is ready, let's all get together, let's lift it up, let's get that done. But we're not thinking about it as like, oh, it's the one thing and then we're done. It is how does that contribute to the longer term, which, Kresge does an incredible job of helping communities find that pace and being around to help sustain that work. So philanthropy really is a great glue for all of this in that sense.
So it's like you're always looking for the two first, like how do I implement and get that done, but how do I do that in a way that builds something? Okay.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest learnings for the state, and something frankly we're still working through, but I feel comfortable being a little vulnerable and saying we're trying to build this muscle, is for the state to really wrap its arms around regions. Instead of having the regions navigate labor and workforce development and natural resources and food and ag, like we as a state can also learn together about a region and then act in coordination to problem solve, to support. And so that's what we're trying to build out right now. Humboldt is a great example, a beacon for offshore wind. And, I brought together the Humboldt community to the state, assembled the state leaders to learn. And now the response is, what are your 3 biggest problems that need us to kind of dig into for the state? And so, time will tell, but I think it is a promising and very new way of state engaging with community.
Awesome, that's so exciting. It's like local, state, and federal, all doing different stuff. So exciting. All right, so I have the coolest job ever now. I get to tell you we're taking a 10-minute break. So please take a 10-minute break, but we also want to be back on schedule. So please, where's Karen? Oh, she just left. Okay, I was told 10 minutes, so let's say be back here, please, at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good morning. Oh, that was pretty good. I was going to make a coffee joke that Rip made that I know there's enough coffee around for you all to respond, but everyone did it the first time. My name is Adi Tomer. I'm a senior fellow here at the Brookings Metro team, and my work and many of our colleagues focuses on infrastructure, and we are a massive part of this federal investment agenda that we're talking about here over yesterday evening and through today. I thought something Rip said at the beginning and was spot on, which, and if I get the wording right, was communities are transfixed on accessing federal investment. I think that's spot on. And deep in that comment, though, if you think about it, it's based on the assumption that we're talking about localities. How can localities access federal dollars? And what I think is a really important element that we're missing often in these federal investment conversations, not just in this moment, but in the past, is the massive role that states play in the federal investment system. In fact, by our own calculations and backed up by our colleagues that I'll introduce here in a second at the White House, 75% of the IIJA or the BIL or whatever acronym you so choose to use for the infrastructure bill is committed directly in formula funding, of which the vast majority go directly to states. What does that number mean? $660 billion. That number, at that size, that equates to power. And states have a ton of it in this moment. And differently than their transfixed local colleagues, they already have the money, or I like to call in these terms, they already have the loot. It is already in their respective bank accounts to spend. And it is a massive part that we are not only under discussing, but in many ways, and the big purpose of this panel, do not yet have a face to those dollars. How are we spending? What is their pursuit? And just as importantly, but especially for today's conversation, how can that money benefit localities and communities of all sizes in all states across the country? So I am delighted to get us started again, and delighted to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Sam Silverberg from the White House. Her and her team helped lead the infrastructure implementation. It is not a task for the lighthearted. It is significant and important work. And with her, we have two colleagues from across the country who work on state coordination, both from different parts of the country, in different political environments that have different challenges ahead. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam to lead the panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So just to set the stage a little bit on where we are, so the president signed this bill into law on November 15th, 2021. So we are almost 2 years into implementation. While there has been a tremendous amount of work underway, we have over $300 billion already out the door, around 38,000 projects that have already been identified are in some level of planning, design, or construction. This is really just the beginning. I mean, any of you who are in infrastructure know that these are long-term investments that take many years to play out. And one of the other key elements of this is that around 90% of the funds are actually going to be executed and implemented by state and local partners. So the federal government is a bank, is a partner, is a colleague, but fundamentally the folks who are doing the hard work on the ground are our state and local partners. So when we started the White House team to implement this, and we brought in my boss, former Mayor Mitch Landrieu, one of the things we knew we needed to do was to create a real partnership with our states and also with our communities, with our tribes, with our territories, again, with all those folks who are doing, in Mitch's words, the hard work of governing well. And so one of the key things that we had learned from ARA, the Recovery Act, was that there were recovery coordinators in each state. And those recovery coordinators were the belly button, were the point of contact for, at that time, Vice President Biden's office to communicate, to be able to share information, but also for the states to lift things up to the federal government, to say, hey, this thing isn't working, this thing can be better, come help us. And so early on, Mitch sent a letter to every single governor asking them to appoint an infrastructure coordinator. And it worked. We have 54 state infrastructure coordinators across the country. This has been an unbelievable opportunity. These folks are our contacts. We talk to them in group monthly, but individually all the time. We're able to share information with them about upcoming opportunities. We're able to connect them with individual federal agency leads so that they can ask questions. Very importantly, they also raise issues to us frequently, which helps us do our work better and helps make us more nimble and innovative and creative in how we make sure that these historic federal resources are also getting down to the ground. Another part of this network that I'm particularly proud of, and I know my colleague Ryan Burney is, who could not be here today, is that these folks kind of independently have self-organized into a community of practice. and they learn from each other and they share with each other, regardless of where they are, what part of the country, what political party. And that's been something that's really wonderful to kind of watch blossom and grow. And so we have Jackson and Wendy, who are two of our phenomenal state infrastructure coordinators from Louisiana and Colorado. And so with that kind of introduction, I would love for you all to just start by telling us, what does it mean to be the state infrastructure coordinator in Louisiana and Colorado, respectively? What do you do? And given the context and the purpose of this event, how do you work with your local partners? So, Jackson?
Sure. Thanks, Sam, for that introduction and for the question. So, what does it mean to be the state infrastructure coordinator in Louisiana? When I was asked to take on this responsibility, the governor basically said, let's make sure we get as much funding as possible. So that was really my mandate. And at first, I thought that the role was going to be coordinating pretty much across the state agencies and maybe some coordination with the White House team or some of the federal agencies. But I really didn't know what I was getting into. Frankly, I didn't have a background in infrastructure. I just was asked to do it because I'd been involved in some of the COVID relief programs and working as the liaison with those federal agencies through our office. And so what it means really and what it's turned into is I do coordinate across state agencies. I've identified points of contacts at each of the agencies that are administering the programs or managing the funds or applying for discretionary grants. And we meet regularly. We similarly have tried to replicate kind of what the White House has done. We have a community, I don't know if it's a community of practice, but we definitely meet regularly. And we also have built a website and a way of coordinating directly to locals and communities. So I see my role as being able to translate all of the information that's coming from the federal side through these 380 different programs and really try to communicate that in a way that's helpful to the local governments and really also to the state agencies to make sure that they're understanding what opportunities are out there. So even though I was thinking originally it was going to be horizontal, it's really become trying to coordinate as much as I can deeply into the local side.
Great, thanks. Very similar story, I think. Sort of the initial mandate was get as much money as possible for the state of Colorado. Of course, to advance the goals of the state and the governor. A big part of it early on was similarly working across our departments, making sure the agencies knew what money was coming, that they were going after it. There is always like a little bit of push there for things that are maybe outside of their normal work. But similarly also like a really strong focus on our local governments. Colorado is a home rule state, so the state can't sort of tell the state all locals what to do. So supporting local governments in identifying opportunities that they can apply for themselves, as well as applying to the state because we re-grant a lot of the infrastructure money. And then also being that point person who knows what's going on. I think that's a really important piece because people want to know, so they can call me and I can do presentations and things like that.
So I think both of your states are doing quite a bit to support the local communities that have the least capacity. So Wendy, maybe starting with you, can you talk about how you're working with some of the lower capacity local communities or tribal communities? And then Jackson, can you also speak about the work that you're doing on that kind of technical assistance and support?
Sure. I think one of the best things that we did, and it was before I started, so it's somebody else's great idea, is that we are funding regional grant navigators through our Council of Government regions. So there are 14 across the state, and we basically gave each Council of Governments $100,000 to hire someone or get someone on contract who could be that grant navigator. And they're similar sort of how the White House works with us. They're also our eyes into local governments, and they're helping local governments identify projects, create regional collaborations, and go after funds. We also did 10 regional summits around the state, just bring everyone together, let them know how it's working, where to get the money. And then we are now just bringing on a consultant who can help with grant writing as well as project planning that we can deploy to locals when they have a project that's ready to go, but they don't have the capacity to go for it.
That's awesome.
In Louisiana, early on, the governor realized that we would, if locals were going to go after these dollars, we would need to support them both with technical assistance and non-federal match. And so we took an interesting approach, which I think will actually pay off in the future, and it was a little slow to get started. I don't know if my mic is feedback. Okay. But what we did was we worked with our municipal association and our county association, which we call the Police Jury Association. They created a joint nonprofit called the Louisiana Infrastructure Technical Assistance Corporation, and the state put $25 million to fund their efforts, both on technical assistance and non-federal match. So where are we now after about a year of them kind of getting set up, because this didn't exist before? They are running two programs. One is their technical assistance program, and the other is their non-federal match support. So local communities can apply. They've been going around the state and meeting with mayors and other local leaders to try and identify projects and pair those with funding opportunities. And the reason why I think this is really important is that this nonprofit, what they call LIDA-Corp, which is, that's the name right now, LIDA-Corp will exist after our administration is over the end of this year. And so that's really, really important. They can receive funds from, it's not just state funding that they can get, they could get it from philanthropy. And so really, a really cool model that I think will pay off.
Yeah, I mean, these are both two phenomenal examples, and we have a good amount of states across the country who are doing similar things, with are either providing kind of project development or planning funds or grant writing support or navigators. And I know something we're really passionate about is focusing across the entire kind of pipeline and continuum, because we need to make sure that our local communities have the resources to chase the dollars, but then once they win them, because they will win them, have the resources to execute really wonderful projects. And that can be really hard. It is hard, admittedly, to navigate the thicket of federal rules and requirements that it takes to be a grantee. It can be challenging to navigate permitting, for example. It can be challenging to navigate some of our other requirements around procurement. And so, I know we have some philanthropic folks in the room for whom we are so extraordinarily grateful for the work that has happened. But want to make sure that we're continuing to think about that whole pipeline. Some of the federal programs that we've launched, again, because we've heard from folks like you, the Thriving Communities Network, Maria Zimmerman, who is an unbelievable leader at the Department of Transportation, working with HUD and others to identify communities and technical assistance partners and providers to help those communities navigate, develop projects, chase federal dollars, and execute well. The Rural Partners Network, acknowledging that rural communities, counties, towns, and others have unique needs and need support both, again, navigating federal resources and also executing great projects. Also, some of our kind of regional and place-based initiatives, like we call it the coal communities, really the energy and power plant communities work, knowing that we have communities in Appalachia and other parts of the country that are historically disadvantaged and yet need significant resources. Because again, we acknowledge that often the communities that need investment the most are the ones that are least able to chase those dollars. So really kudos to both of your states, and also to, again, folks in this room and many of our partners that have helped launch. Oh, hello, another infrastructure coordinator in the house. That's Manelli from New York. We really love the infrastructure coordinators. Okay, so a little bit of a pivot. Adi mentioned all of the formula funds, right? I mean, highway, transit, BEAD, which is our big broadband program, the state revolving funds. So as kind of representatives of your states, can you tell us a little bit about how you all decide how to allocate formula funds, and what are the best ways for locals to engage the states to make sure their needs are heard? Wendy, do you want to start?
Sure. First, I want to dispel a myth that was said a little bit in the beginning. Even though they're formula funds, they don't generally just get dropped into state bank accounts. A lot of them require a plan. They require a lot of thinking. They say, here's the money we've set aside for you. Now, in order to get this, you need to give us a plan of what you're going to do about it. So a lot of the decisions of what happens with those funds happens during that planning phase. The funds aren't necessarily released to us until we've done that plan. In general, in Colorado, we're relying on plans that we made in the past. So we have like a 10-year transportation plan. We have a renewable energy roadmap. We have a resilience plan. So we're relying on those plans to decide what to do with this money because it's all moving very quickly. I'd say those plans had public engagement. They had some engagement from locals, but they weren't done contemplating all this money, coming to us right away in reality. So it's the best we have, and we do also, I'd say if local governments come to us with good projects and let us know what they're interested in, those things can get woven into those decisions. So that's a really important point for locals. And we say that through our grant navigators to let the projects rise up to us so we know what people need and what they want.
So I would say it depends on the program. If it's first of all, if it's an existing formula program, it's going to operate similarly on the transportation side. There's a huge backlog. Our legislature, which is not normally aligned with the current governor, has to approve of they have a transportation committee, and so they approve kind of the way that those dollars are spent. And so that's a limitation to some degree. But I will say one of those formula programs, there was an interesting way that we were able to change some of that dynamic, which was the Bridge Formula Program. The Bridge Formula Program, I think the infrastructure law changed the rules on, I don't know all the details, but it changed the rules on the match for off-system, locally owned bridges. And so we set aside a much larger portion of those dollars to the locally owned, quote-unquote, off-system bridges. And our state DOT hired some consultants that worked with the local leaders to help them prioritize and identify which bridges they would apply those dollars to. And so that was it's an interesting way that the state was able to both increase the amount of deference it was giving to locals, but also support them through a formula program.
You got it totally right. It's a program we're excited about. So there's $27.5 billion in the law for the Bridge Formula Program. And one of the things that we were able to do with Congress is because bridges off the national highway system are generally in much poorer condition than those that are on the interstate because they're largely responsible or largely owned by either county governments or local governments and generally do not receive the same level of investment, they're in much worse condition. And particularly you could imagine in rural areas where a bridge that's load posted and can't carry a school bus or a truck or a fire truck can have pretty significant impacts on a community. We changed the law so that any of those off-system bridges can be funded at 100% federal cost share. So no local funds required to repair off-system bridges. This was intended to be a carrot and an incentive for states to choose to invest more in off-system, at least during this 5-year reauthorization. And it's worked. I mean, there's a number of states that have created dedicated programs and also reallocated a lot more of their resources to those off-system bridges. They're also often smaller, which makes them a little cost effective. But we also complement that, of course, with investments in extremely large bridges like the Brent Spence Bridge between Kentucky and Ohio, for example. So I know that both of you also have the IRA in your portfolios. So I'd love to hear about how IRA implementation perhaps presents some of its own challenges and opportunities as you think about both states receiving and deploying the funds and also engaging with your local partners?
So I can speak to this a little bit. I think the IRA is another enormous opportunity, but it's very complicated, and there are some grant programs that are similar to the way the infrastructure law is set up, but the tax credits I think are very. It's a huge opportunity, not just for the private sector, but also because of the direct pay provisions, really important for the public sector and state and local governments. But we're trying to wrap our head around how that will work and how we'll budget for things that we're doing that could take advantage of the tax credits in future years. So it's more complicated, is what I would say. I think as far as working with locals, the IRA has two programs that are through EPA that have been our big primary focus, and that's the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and the Solar for All competition. And so that has really, we had a climate action plan already in place, but we're, as part of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, revising our climate action plan and continuing. I think we had a meeting, and I wasn't there obviously, but in the north part of the state, doing public engagement on the priority climate action plan that it's set up really well. It will enable, once we've got the priority climate action plan in, it will enable both the state and most likely the local governments to apply for implementation dollars using that plan. And so the structure of that program really requires a lot of coordination between the state and locals, and I just think it's a great example of a cool Inflation Reduction Act program.
Yep, very similar. It's interesting how things are converging on the same opportunities in the states. But so some of the grant opportunities that Jackson mentioned also have been the focus of the state of Colorado. So the Solar for All and Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. Again, sort of building on the renewable energy roadmap and the climate reduction roadmap that we have in the state. Going back to the tax credits, same, we're sort of figuring out what our role is in that. We definitely, we want as many of those tax credits to come to the state of Colorado as possible, which entails individuals and businesses going for those tax credits. So we're thinking through technical support we can provide to, for example, disadvantaged communities where the investment tax credit gets a bump for being in those communities, to help them understand what the investors are getting out of being in that community so that they can attract the kind of investors that they want and that they benefit as well. Our economic development organization at the state is working closely with a lot of businesses to try to attract those tax credit investors. And hopefully, we don't even have really at this point a window into whether we're doing a good job. So we don't have reports from IRS to say how many tax credits have been taken in Colorado. We hope that in the future we'll get something like that. Not obviously like names of individuals, but amounts. So we're tracking things like press releases and other ways of finding information. But we know it's out there, and we know we have a role to support and to educate.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about kind of things at the policy and program level, but just to kind of drive things to the ground, are there any specific projects that you'd love to kind of share with the group that you're particularly proud of in your state? Things that you've helped make real and are going to make an impact?
So yeah, I think there are a few, but I think the biggest one that stands out for me right now is some work that we did for the Department of Energy's Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships programs. So GRIP, yes. Raise your hand if you've heard of GRIP. Okay, all right. So the program is focused, as it sounds, on the power grid and resilience and innovation, et cetera. And so in 2021, Hurricane Ida hit the southern part of Louisiana, and the greater New Orleans area, parts of it were without power for almost a month. So there was like a giant transmission line that fell into the Mississippi River. It was really bad. So you know, grid resilience is really important for southern Louisiana and coastal Louisiana. And so we were really interested in this opportunity, but our state energy office was only a couple people, and so didn't have the capacity. So the governor's office, we convened an interagency grid working group with our utility regulator, the Public Service Commission, it's called, and with other relevant state agencies. And the goal of this working group was to put together a compelling application for these grid proposals. And so we worked with the affected cities, City of New Orleans, the local government, Terrebonne Parish, that was really without power for a long time, and put together a concept paper, submitted an application, and I think we're going to hear pretty soon about an award. But really excited about what we were able to put together. The actual I should have said this. The actual project is building community resilience hubs. So the idea came from community. There was a nonprofit called Together Louisiana that was really pushing this idea, and so it fit perfectly. And with expanding kind of their efforts statewide and focusing on not just resilience post-disaster, but building like centers where people can go as they're evacuating, et cetera. So we're really able to build it into our emergency response planning. And it's creating these solar-powered community hubs across the state. I mean, that's really what it'll be. It's going to be, if we're awarded, it will be a 10-year program, $500 million total of funding. So really excited about it. And it took a lot of, yeah.
I was briefed on the awards, but I honestly don't remember.
Okay.
So
It's
sorry.
called
I'm not holding it back.
It's called the HERO program. Okay. So maybe you'll see a release about it soon.
Wendy, anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, this is a tough one because there's this like rolling, exciting news every week. So instead of talking about one project, I'll talk about 1 week. A couple of weeks ago, in about 1 week, maybe it was 2 weeks, we heard of about $22 million in urban forestry projects going to multiple cities across the state, including some very small rural areas. One of our rural areas got $1 million for tree planting. I think they only have 500 people in the town, so we're wondering what's going to happen there. In that same week, one of our rural communities got about $5 million for a recycling center, which was long in the making of them wanting to be more, have more recycling, but they just couldn't make the numbers work there. So they got that. The state also got money from that pool of funds to do a solid waste plan. 4 or 5 of our rural communities got an energy prize. One of our communities got an award for building codes improvements. The state also got building codes improvements. So this is like the excitement that's happening now. And I think a lot of it, it's not to say that the state wrote those grants or did those things, but we're starting to see the fruits of our navigators and getting the word out there, and just the local government sort of understanding what's going on and how to apply, what to apply for, how to put together a good project.
And I love both of these examples because they are not transportation, and I love transportation. Right. I'm from a transportation background. But this is not just a roads and bridges bill, right? We have grid resilience, we have community forestry, we have recycling, building codes. There's so much in there. So if you've not visited build.gov, here's my plug. So okay, we have 5 minutes left, and I want to ask a question about setting your communities and your state up for long-term success. So you all may have read in the news that Jackson State is about to go through a political transition, and a transition in which the state level government will probably not be well aligned with some of the big cities. And so would love to hear how you all are thinking about kind of how you set up these structures for longevity, knowing that, again, building infrastructure, building a clean energy economy is not a 4-year project or even 8-year project, but a long-term project. So, Jackson, don't cry.
No, yeah, I'll try not to. So I think one of the, I mentioned earlier the governor's term limited, so there was going to be a transition to a new administration regardless. And so I've been thinking about how to kind of put some things in place that would exist after I was not in the office. And so I think we have a pretty strong classified civil service, which is what we call it, and they're protected from sort of political changes. And so I'm not part of that, but I was able to, we actually created a new position of a classified civil service person called the state planning manager. And so this person has been working very closely with me on all of the coordination with the state agencies, with local planning commissions and local governments. And so she's still gonna be there. And I'm currently working on a transition binder for her so that the work as much as possible can continue, even if the next governor doesn't appoint an infrastructure coordinator, which is possible. So the one area I'm really worried about are all the work that we're doing with respect to addressing climate change. But fortunately, like I mentioned, the climate pollution reduction grant, once we have that in, which we will do, get our priority climate action plan in before January. Once that's in and approved, local governments can use that plan to access implementation dollars, even if the state doesn't go after the implementation dollars. So trying to identify things like that and do as much as we can before the end.
Thanks. Wendy, have you given this some thought too?
A little bit. I mean, we're not expecting a transition like that, but so when I came on board, I was inserted into our recovery office, which was stood up for ARPA. And that office includes liaisons for each department. And we've been talking about how does that office move forward? One needs a name change, because eventually we are recovered. But it's really been about strategic investments in the state and building that rapport with federal funding and federal government. So we are talking about that, how to make that an organization within the state that could keep moving forward.
That's great. So last 2 minutes, any last words, particularly for kind of a local focused audience of how locals can work with states, how locals can set up for success, and anything else that we didn't cover in this great conversation that you'd like to raise?
I think partnerships, I think this was said earlier, are really, really important. The applications that I've seen be successful that our state agencies have driven have had more partners rather than fewer. And so I think that was said earlier too, but just super important. Reach out to your state infrastructure coordinator. If you don't know who it is, this is our job we want to talk to folks who are in our states that are trying to go after these funds.
Wendy?
Yeah, same. I would say, reach out to your infrastructure coordinator. One of our roles is to demystify this for everyone. So connect you with the right people and the right agencies. And like I said earlier, let us know kind of what your hopes and dreams are for this money, what your projects are, because we look at these opportunities every day. And so if we say, oh, I know there's this community that really is trying to do this thing that this is perfect for, we'll call you and we'll tell you and we'll connect you. I would also say I talked to philanthropy in Colorado as well about the importance of providing support to nonprofits to get engaged in this decision. So having nonprofit members who can just pay attention to what's happening, because there are a lot of plans being made, a lot of decisions being made, and it's, like I said, it's all happening so fast. If we hear from constituents that they want things a certain way, we can try to make that happen. I mean, it's flexible too. It's fast and flexible.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you. Thank you for being on this panel, but also thank you for your service to your states and to the country. I hope what you have learned here is that every state has a state infrastructure coordinator. They are phenomenal resources. They care about locals. I mean, I think what I heard really from both of you is that you care about locals winning their own grants, you care about locals partnering with the states, you care about locals executing good projects, because at the end of the day, that's good for the whole state. And I think you'll find that, that perspective across many of our states and communities. This has been such a phenomenal opportunity. I thank you all. I thank the Brookings and Kresge folks for hosting us, and look forward to speaking to many of you later. Thank you.
I'm Xavier de Souza Briggs, or Zav for short. I am also part of the Brookings Metro team, and as we reset the stage here, I'm going to introduce this final conversation of the morning and save us a minute or two maybe. We're going to have a conversation about climate investments that help communities thrive, and we want to interrogate that a little bit, as you can probably tell from that title. There is a conventional wisdom, there's certainly a school of thought right now that, well, of course, climate investments help communities thrive, and they're increasingly critical to helping communities thrive in the near term and the long. And we want to ask, well, under what conditions, and what will it really take? We saw this morning's conversations as not just themes in a set, many of them tied, of course, to the big federal investment bills, but also as sort of rounding out a picture. First of all, let me do the most important thing, and that is take the temperature of the room. Are you hearing some things that ring true this morning so far? Yeah? Are you getting some new ideas, questions as well that you're sitting with so far? Okay, good. This afternoon is going to let us dig into those, and we're going to ask you to dive in, and we're going to be interacting with each other. And I'll say a word about that toward the end of the conversation, just ahead of our lunch break, but I'm glad to hear that. And I'm now going to go ahead and introduce our guests, the members of the panel, starting at my left. Hi, Stephanie. Stephanie Gadigby-Jenkins is Vice President for Strategy and a co-founder of the Communities First Fund. Stephanie's career has taken her from Capitol Hill to federal agencies and local government as well, and the nonprofit sector, formerly the Natural Resources Defense Council, and more. Stephanie, welcome. Next to her is Roger Kim. He is president and CEO of the Climate and Clean Energy Equity Fund. Roger has also worked in the public sector and in philanthropy, so worn a range of hats. And finally, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre is executive director of Uprose, the oldest Latino community-based organization in Brooklyn, New York, but wears many other hats as well. She's chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. I thought I got around, but Elizabeth really gets around all across the country and travels the world to share our opportunities and challenges here in this country, learn from leaders and communities abroad, which is fantastic. And she was chair of President Biden's National Economic Justice Advisory Council, a really important body, host of the US EPA. So again, welcome to our panel. And I want to begin by going back to this issue of the received wisdom about climate investments versus what it really will take. And Elizabeth, I'm going to turn to you first. Okay. I want to ask each of you to share with us in a nutshell what your work seeks to contribute and why it's so important in this moment. Elizabeth, can we start with you?
Well, thank you, Ashe, everyone. Buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here today. For us, those of us who have endured a legacy of extraction that has landed in our bodies, that has landed in the kinds of disparities that you are all witnessing, it's an opportunity to start thinking about space and place in what we call in our community a green reindustrialization, of looking at the toxic sites and looking at the places that have contributed to that and making them pivot to serve our needs. And our needs right now are about climate adaptation, mitigation, resilience. They're about making it possible for people to thrive in the midst of climate chaos. It's also opportunities for people to be able to develop the kinds of skills and the kinds of resources necessary so that they could create different economies of scale. And so that's where we are right now. And so we've got a lot of initiatives that we always say that a just transition, that a transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And that the work that we're doing isn't just aspirational, that it is operational. We know exactly what needs to happen in terms of infrastructure, in terms of redevelopment, in terms of a different kind of economy. We know where resources should be coming from and all the different kinds of financing models that are necessary. And so the vision is larger than one would think, coming from frontline communities, and investments have to be made in those local visions, because if they aren't, then we are not going to be able to make it.
Elizabeth, thank you. Let me ask you for a quick example, if you wouldn't mind, because I was struck in our conversations, yours and mine, about the degree to which, as you zero in on specific opportunities and challenges, your community is right near the waterfront. It has an industrial past, it has a waterfront past, it has lots of layers to it. You have identified specific opportunities, you have redirected large-scale development, and you've engaged across sectors, public, private, nonprofit, and even different levels of government as you've done it. Could you share just a little bit about that waterfront story?
Sure, we have, so we are the largest significant maritime industrial area in New York City. It's in Sunset Park. And we have not only fought against developers who were looking for zoning that would take the industrial sector and turn it into sort of a high-end luxury space like you find in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, but we really fought to keep it industrial, to keep it working class. And as a result of that, we were able to attract offshore wind, and you know that that is going to be assembled at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. It's going to generate, I think, something like 6,000 jobs. We've launched the first community-owned solar initiative with at the Brooklyn Army Terminal with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. That's $2.7 million, 685 kilowatts, 200 families and businesses are going to benefit. We have mapped 20 rooftops for the possibility of community-owned solar. That would cost about $27 million over the next 10 years and would benefit, that would be 9 megawatts and would benefit over 3,000 families and businesses. And we've also created initiatives for transit hubs because we are one of those communities that's considered a last mile community. And so we are not only trying to get a zoning text amendment to make last mile less polluting and onerous in our community, but we have created an initiative so that we could make sure that those vehicles are electrified and that we have alternative vehicles that are community owned. We have just gotten a grant from Equinor, which is the business that's going to be doing the offshore wind in Sunset Park. It's their equity fund to start the first just transition worker training center in the United States, because we don't have workforce development people really don't know what a just transition is. They don't have much experience in the green economy, and we have an idea about how that looks for frontline communities. Because if our communities don't benefit from the amenities, then it's not environmental justice. If they've had to endure the legacy of abuse and aren't prioritized for the amenities. And it's so easy for other partners to just say, New York City is going to benefit from this, and other communities are going to benefit, but not doing the hard work of figuring out what does the supply chain look like, and where are the gaps, and how do we make sure the MWBEs are connected and that the unions are working well with them. How there are so many gaps. Remember, we are creating an industry, and we're inventing this stuff as we go along. right? And so sometimes the language doesn't exist and we create it. For offshore wind, for example, we're going to be training developers on how to center a just transition and equity and justice. They don't know how to do that. They want to apply for the grants and check that IIJA box and say that they came to our communities with their ideas and that satisfies that quotient of IIJA. But IIJA is more than that. And IIJA really has to do with the fact that a majority of our communities are the ones that are in harm's way because of climate change, and that they have to be leading on infrastructure, on legislation, on all the things that are going to impact climate change. And so we're going to be training them. And then I can go on with all the different things that we're doing, and yet still, here we are, a small grassroots women of color-led organization in Sunset Park that is really engaged in transforming the landscape, right? And base building and doing popular education while putting infrastructure on the ground. Often funders and people who are in the business of investing in these things think of us as small, as not being impactful. They think that the resources have to go to larger organizations, but the truth is that the transformation is happening on the ground. Everything from the CLCPA that was passed in the state of New York to make it possible for the money to be moved to our communities, to the actual work, literally the shovel-ready projects are being done by us. And so I would urge you to learn more about what is happening all over the country, because these are projects that are not just about our community, they're replicable. The projects that we create in Sunset Park, we collect all the learnings, all the mistakes, because we want another community to be able to hit the ground running. This is movement work for us. And so, and then we work with non-traditional partners, unconventional partners, and I'll give you this example as the last one. For 7 years, we fought against Jamestown, Industry City in New York City. You may have read about it, maybe you didn't. But they came at us with REVNY, the Partnership of New York, Chambers of Commerce. They dropped tons of money in community organizations locally because they had a zoning vision that would have not only pushed our community out, but made it impossible for small businesses to thrive, especially after COVID. Their vision was dated, and they had all the support and all the money to rezone the largest significant maritime industrial area in New York. And we fought back with an alternative vision, which was about the green reindustrialization of Sunset Park, to decarbonize the entire community. We have mapped everything, and not just about renewable energy, but food sovereignty. There's an initiative for that, because that's what our community is talking about. And so we were told we were sort of the David and 3 Goliaths. And this company came at us with media, with all 5 public relations firms, right? And when we won that fight against the rezoning, I remember standing at the SBMT with Chuck Schumer and with the owner of Industry City. And the owner of Industry City said, "So was this your vision?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is the vision. This is the vision." And he's like, "Okay, so what do we do?" I said, "Let's talk about how you're going to give up all your rooftops and how you might be able to share with us your parking lots so that we could create solar canopies and give ownership to the community and provide small businesses that have been so devastated by COVID access to renewable energy." And so we've had several conversations with them about that, which is an amazing thing, right? And most people would say, "Oh, because you're activists, because you fight, you won't build with a partner that you fought for 7 years." Yes, we will. We'll do that because it's in the interest of justice. And so we have, and we're doing those things. And so every single one of our initiatives, and you can find it on our website, is called The Grid. And it's a plan literally to decarbonize Sunset Park. We have one to decarbonize small businesses and what those incentives and those resources, and everyone has a price tag and a timeline and a list of what kinds of investments are needed in order to operationalize it. And so we're doing several of them, and think about it. When I opened by saying this has regional impacts, right? Because we're talking about Sunset Park, which really faces the Brooklyn Bay and Lower Manhattan. And so it would create a supply chain of tons of jobs. So yeah, I hope I covered everything.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Spell out one thing for us, CLCPA.
the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is the most aggressive climate legislation in the country. And it was passed we created a coalition called New York Renews. We have over 370 members across the state. And we fought to pass that legislation so that the resources were available to operationalize a just transition on the ground in communities like ours in Push Buffalo throughout the state that have been DACs, disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. This is a landmark piece of New York State legislation. I just want to make sure that everyone in the room is aware. Stephanie, same question to you. What do you seek to contribute in the work you're leading, and why is it so important right now?
So first of all, thank you for allowing us to be here. Communities First is both a fund supporting the civic infrastructure and really building out what is necessary, as Sam just talked about, making sure that we can have community groups really be part of the conversation at the local and federal level as well as part of it. In addition to our fund, we also have the Communities First Infrastructure Alliance. We're the largest alliance supporting the equitable implementation of the federal funding. And we're holding actually beyond just climate, the infrastructure funding, because we know combined those things have a transformative impact, in addition to the COVID money still that is being made available. One of the things that we also have been very much focused on is really thinking about how do we bring this all of government narrative that's come from the Biden administration to the state level. It was beautiful to see the infrastructure coordinators here. I'd ask the audience how many people knew that they had an infrastructure coordinator, and did they know who they were? Right. So yesterday, we just had our first New England regional convening, thanks to the investments of Kresge and other funders, to really start to have this conversation more regionally and more intentionally. That brings together this all of government narrative around how do we bring together the Department of Transportation, HUD, USDA, EPA, Department of Energy, to really start to have this conversation around all of the federal funding that's flowing, but have that at the state level. Because I don't know that most people understand, first of all, how much money we are truly talking about. Zab, just thinking back to 08, 09, when you were helping to lead the American recovery response that played itself out with ARA, you all put out $800 billion. That was the most amount of money that the federal government had ever put out. And you made it up, right? Like, you came up with the number and you were like, this is what it would take to bail out the auto industry and the banks. Between the COVID money at 1.9 trillion with a T, the infrastructure money at 1.2 trillion with a T, by the end of 2001, the federal government had already put out $3.1 trillion going to states, not even getting to IRA. So we were talking about almost 3 to 4 times the amount of money that we use. And in this moment, when we start to really think about that magnitude of money is about to be unlocked in places, and communities who have had plans for decades are now in the position to really support systemic change, right? But there isn't a mechanism to bridge the conversation. And so Communities First is really starting to do that conversation more locally, to bridge the conversations between community plans, visions, solutions, into the public planning process, so that they may be able to work together in unlocking this funding. Because the reality is Congress gave a whole bunch of carrots, but no sticks on accountability. And so if you want to continue to do the same investments that have continued to harm communities, impact our climate and our Mother Earth more broadly, you can continue to do that. There's nothing that tells you not to. But there are also a whole bunch of incentives to show you how to do something different. And so these regional convenings are really our attempt to showcase, here is the possible, and here's what it would look like to do it collectively. How do we imagine a world where we all thrive? And that's our major focus for this fall, in addition to the work that we've been doing and really bringing together national, state, local leaders like Elizabeth to have the conversations necessary to advance their visions and plans.
I want to bring us back in a minute to accountability, because we are going to talk, all of us, about the punch list frankly, the unfinished business, including for the public sector. Before I do that, and Roger, before I get you in here, Stephanie, would you say one more word about the capacity thing and you know, some of the most critical capacities you're finding it critical to build? Here's why I ask. We all know why we have shorthand. We need it for certain exchanges. Technical assistance, capacity building, these are shorthand that get thrown around all the time. I worry some of it is TA light. It's really fairly basic information provision, maybe a little bit of guidance on what's an application all about, something like that. Not necessarily the stuff that makes a transformative difference, necessary as it is to have those basics in place. Can you say a word about, you know, what's different about the sort of capacity you're seeking to create?
Yeah. So maybe let me also separate that when we're often talking about technical assistance, it's literally helping to demystify, and that requires its own processes. But for the capacity, it's not that communities don't have the ability. They can follow it. They need the resources. And so that's, even as we talk about communities first, we are holding both community-based organizations in the small and mid-sized places that have part-time staff who don't have the ability to really sit and do the grant applications that are required. For you to be able to really compete for a DOT application, for example, at the Department of Transportation, you need about $100,000 to pay to play. But I would say that one thing that this administration has been intentional about, and this is actually through the Thriving Communities Interagency Network, has been this all-of-government approach around technical assistance. For the first time, EPA is putting out centers across the country, 10 in each region, you should know them, that are helping folks to access and understand where the resources are. For the first time, EPA is putting out a grant makers funding in the tune of $50 million per region. $10 million to the folks who apply, but $40 million to community-based organizations. We have never heard these types of numbers, and yet we have not been in a position to ensure that communities can actually participate in the conversations. And this is where having entities like Kresge helping to fill that gap, because even as you can come in with some of that funding and receive the federal funding, to be able to actually then have the back office support to take on a federal review process is a completely different piece. And I think that's the role that philanthropy plays. And what has been powerful is that in each of these regions, as we've been doing these regional convenings, we've had regional funders in the places like for New England, for example, the Barr Foundation, as we prepare next week for our Detroit convening, McKnight and Builders, the Climate Equity Fund, really having these conversations to bring community-based organizations, the philanthropic community, public sector leaders to really think about collectively, and private sector, because they are part of this equation, as Elizabeth talked about, to really think about how do we really start to advance these projects that we've been talking about for a very long time that are not just shovel ready, but shovel worthy to be part of this pipeline.
Thank you. Roger, tell us about the Equity Fund and why its work matters.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm so honored to be between these two amazing leaders. I started the Equity Fund in 2016 to basically fill a real gap within climate movement. I didn't see it as having the power that it needed, particularly in supporting communities of color in rural places, and then having the power, especially to move big policies at the local and at the state level. So our movement was very heavily federally focused, really white, really old, and didn't have the base that it needed, particularly in the states that was much younger and much more diverse. So we started the Equity Fund to fill this gap within philanthropy. We're now in 13 states. We have about 140 grantees across those 13 states, building new coalitions, and these are mainly groups that are brand new to climate and energy. They don't look like, sound like, or talk like environmental groups. They come to this work from economic issues, from health, from workers' rights, from immigrant rights issues. And the on-ramp into the world of climate is really from all those different lanes. And so not only do they understand the imperative of climate and are able to talk about why parts per billion are important, but more importantly, be able to translate this to real communities and talking about issues like health and jobs and clean air, and again, connecting those to real life issues that people really care about. So our purpose is to help these organizations that are rooted in communities to organize. So we fund mainly organizing and civic engagement strategies in organizations that are really building power of their communities to be engaged in these processes, and again, to bring their community's perspective and priorities to the table when it comes to policy, right? So again, health, jobs, the things that those communities need to thrive. Just a couple of numbers to kind of set the frame for us as well. We heard a little bit about some of the stark polling numbers that are out there about who knows about IRA. This is a few months old, but this is from Yale Climate. 27% of black voters said they've heard about IRA, and that increases to 78% say they support IRA once they've heard about it. So we're talking about over 50% gain once they learn about it. Latinos, 38% have heard about it. That jumps to 67% who say they support it after learning about it. For whites, it's 41, jumps to 65% once they've heard about it. Low income, less than $50,000 annual income families, 27% have heard about it. 72% they support it, say they support it once they learn about IRA. So an incredible, huge information gap that's out there, particularly in the communities that we need to have engaged to see these benefits the most, right? These are the parts of the country that have been skipped over, that have been disinvested in, that actually need these resources most desperately to really turn their communities into thriving, livable communities. So the good news here is that, when groups have the resources to do this, it's amazing what they can accomplish. We've had organizations go from having done nothing on climate to passing 100% clean energy bill with equity provisions in places like Minnesota, in oil states like New Mexico, making sure that there are protections for workers and the just transition for oil workers that are coming out of a toxic industry. We just did a round of federal implementation grants this summer. And again, these are groups that are brand new to climate. In New Mexico, there's a coalition that has been working for years around green jobs and green workforce development. They're now working with community colleges to apply for IRA funds to upgrade the equipment and the curriculum in their wind turbine technician program in junior colleges. In Illinois, they're working with the Illinois Finance Authority on a $1.2 billion application to form the Illinois Climate Bank. And this is to establish funding solar installation training centers which was established by IIJA and IIJA, which were the state bills that helped get passed several years ago. And these are centers that are operated by local community colleges in partnership with labor unions, with member churches, and again are structured to prioritize low-income communities, informally incarcerated people that are coming out of the system as well. We have a whole set of groups working on resilience centers. So local grantees that are working in hard states like Florida, for example, where the state government support is not as great in some other places, but working with local governments like Tampa, Orlando, and Miami-Dade to actually co-author and apply for federal funds to establish and expand climate resilience hubs. Decarbonization of buildings in the public sector in Georgia and in Maryland. So the list goes on, and again, just evidence that once groups have the resources and the support, they're so ready to engage and show impact really, really quickly. One of the tensions that has been named throughout the day has been sort of like this kind of the speed and urgency at which we need to move. And I'll say that, moving fast without really paying attention to equity only preserves the status quo. And we know what the status quo has wrought in these communities. They've been left behind, they've been neglected. And so if we don't actually do this with a real sense of purpose and an imperative around ensuring that equity is at the center of what we're doing, then what we're gonna do is again, leave these communities behind, right? We have made the promise of green jobs over and over and over again for the last couple of decades. We actually need to deliver on those. This is the time, the money is there, and we need to make sure that the community see it in ways that people can touch, feel, and see it in their pocketbooks. And this is also about people's faith in government right now as well, that government can actually do good things for people's lives and transform it in ways that are really tangible and meaningful. And so we have a lot to do to make sure that people's faith in government is restored by making sure that these benefits actually reach the ground. So there's huge issues around capacity, as Stephanie also pointed out. What we're trying to do is create an UPROS in every state, multiplied by 10, if not 100, and then have them go over to Stephanie's organization to make sure that they get the technical support they need to be able to bring these resources down into their communities. And again, we need to do this with a real sense of purpose around equity, or else we're going to recreate the status quo.
Thanks, Roger. So you're arguing in those last couple of thoughts there that some of the most important tasks, this is sort of where Rip and Alan kicked us off this morning, some of the most important tasks for whether we can deliver within and beyond government with the other partners and regain that trust are in this work that we're talking about, making sure that climate investments actually help communities to thrive. Here's a last question, everybody, because you've already put so much on the table. I'm watching the clock. We have a little under 4 minutes, so apologies for the lightning round. Stephanie, I'll start with you. Make some homework assignments. Name a couple things. Like, who needs to do what if this is really going to work?
All right. So first of all, I just want to also just ground that this is an implementation moment. It is quick for us to then start to talk about policy. We've got money that needs to be spent, and it needs to be spent equitably. So at the federal level, there's really an opportunity about how do we continue to create those enabling conditions that support the outcomes that that President Biden has put out. At the state level, 90% of this money is with the governors. We have not held them accountable. We do not even know what their priorities around the infrastructure resources. President Biden, after signing the bill in November of 2021 on the infrastructure side, put together principles. When he passed IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, he put some principles. The governors to date, many of them have not put on principles. It is a great opportunity to contact your local and state governors to ask this question around what are the principles that are guiding these resources? Make sure that the infrastructure coordinators are actually public information that people can be able to reach, because right now they're the ones who are supposed to be coordinating, and most of us don't even know who they are. It is also an opportunity to really have a conversation with being able to really think through how do we collectively start to build a conversation that bridges together both community vision and the public planning process together. And one of the things that this administration has been very clear on in a lot of their criteria is that they are incentivizing more community collaboration. And so is there a role for philanthropy to support some of those pieces? Because the capacity means that we actually have to pay for people's time, as was talked about in the last plenary. And then finally, for those who are doing TA, one of the questions is really around how are you building equity into your considerations as you are going out and having these conversations and thinking about how we meet this moment. This is a moment for the greater movement. We have an opportunity to build not just for today, but 7 generations out. And what I'm holding is actually a trip that we just took to Standing Rock, building one of the largest wind farms on native land. It's going to be indigenous owned, which takes it to a whole different level. And what's powerful is every decision that they're making, they're thinking about it 7 generations out. So that the decisions that they're making today are not just for us, but for their future. I think we all have an invitation to really think about how do we build a more just and equitable and climate resilient future so that we can all thrive.
That's powerful, thank you. Roger, a couple of big things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Stephanie pointed out, many of the most consequential decisions are going to be made at the state and at the local and tribal government level. So I think the federal government's done some good work in creating some frameworks for us in the application process and asking questions around the importance of equity. So, what is your community engagement plan? What's your accountability plan? Equity and community benefits. But the work just needs to be much, much deeper than that. And we partnered with Stephanie and a coalition of other organizations creating a greenhouse gas reduction fund best practices for equity and governance guide. And there's a lot in there that also applies to the 500 other programs that the federal government has via IRA and the infrastructure law. So it details the best practices that we need to all be engaged in to better ensure that equitable implementation is going to happen for direct benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities, looking at things like community benefit agreements, making sure that there's accountability measures, that people are actually describing those in their applications and taking that next step and going much deeper. Breaking the status quo is going to require all levels of government to go much further and much deeper than what we're doing right now. And so the other piece of this, I think, is the call to philanthropy in particular, and being able to make sure that these organizations that we all need to be engaged in all these practices and all these projects and all these processes have the resources to be engaged. And again, that means philanthropy really needs to double, triple down on these organizations that are in these communities so they actually have the resources and the staff time to be part of the planning process. And again, as we've heard over and over again, there are groups that already have these visions and have done the plans that are now just waiting for the resources to come through for them to do this. Then there are groups that have not done this before that we absolutely need to make sure that they are engaged in this. And so philanthropy has an absolutely pivotal role in making sure that those resources are there. And I will just say that even though we're coming out of this moment around equity overall in our society, that moment is actually weakening quite significantly. So the commitment to equity, particularly as I've heard from other funders, they really saw equity, particularly among climate funders, equity as a charitable strategy, right? This is like, oh, we need to do something around equity, so we'll do some grants to these groups of color working in these communities. What we need to understand is that equity is a strategy to win, right? If we're going to actually implement this stuff and really change our society, equity has to be central to this. This is not charity that we're talking about. This is absolutely central to us implementing and changing our society into the one that we've envisioned.
Thank you, Roger. Elizabeth, last word to you.
I always say that the path to climate justice is local. And so I would really urge you to familiarize yourself with the breadth and complexity of the work that is happening on the ground. I'd like to remind you that it's not cookie cutter, that it looks very different in Puerto Rico and Hawaii and Alaska than it looks in Brooklyn and West Virginia. Offshore wind lands differently in Brooklyn than it does in Oregon, where there are different challenges. And so it's often the case that people come up with these cookie cutter solutions for solutions where the topography, the people, and the history are different. Managed retreat is not something that is loved by the Seminole people or the Geechee in Savannah. And so we know our people all over the country. And so we hope that you do too, and that you know that the solutions that they are presenting are complex, necessary, reclaim ancestral knowledge, and are going to put us on the path to justice. I also want to remind folks that when you're doing this, that technical assistance doesn't necessarily, capacity building looks different in different places. For us, we want to know about investments and tax equity, and we want to know the language that we didn't have access to growing up because we come from struggle. And so that's the kind of technical assistance that we need. How do we pay for something like this? It looks different in a lot of different places. And so I would also, the last thing that I'd say is that you approach this with tremendous humility. Climate change is big, it's complex, the answers lie in community, and we need to be able to share expertise and knowledge with each other so that we can move faster. If we are leaderful, we will be able to move faster.
Thank you, Elizabeth. In a moment, everybody, I'm going to say a quick word about this afternoon. Before I do that, please join me in thanking these amazing guests.
So I'm just going to do a couple things quickly. I'm going to just summarize a bit of what I heard roaming around the workshops. I hope you found them energizing and enlightening. And I'm going to introduce our next couple of speakers, actually. So this morning I said that I intended for us to stay with you in the journey ahead. And I hope what the workshops help to reveal, even if they didn't give you all the answers to your questions, is to map out what that work might be in the journey ahead. And I think it's too much to summarize all the different kinds of themes and questions that I heard across the 4 different workshops about infrastructure investment and infrastructure workforce and regional economic development and industrial policy. But what they did lift up for me is that each in our own ways, we're trying to navigate across these complicated interfaces. Some might call them divides if they were really cynical, between, say, local and state government when it comes to infrastructure investment or economic development, between community, civic, and corporate actors when it comes to big industrial investments and semiconductors and the like, between sectors like education and transportation, or housing and energy when it comes to workforce development or sustainability planning. And the interfaces, what we're navigating across are differences sometimes in cultures and values, sometimes in the incentives that people across those interfaces possess, in the structures that they embody and that get the dollars out the door into the hands of communities or not. And across all of those interfaces, also trying to hold growth, equity, and resilience in mind. So I'm hoping, and I hope you heard the same, that on that journey ahead, that for us at Brookings Metro, there are both successes and challenges that for us to spotlight in the research that we do. There are conversations that I think we can continue to convene among peers like you all, but also across these sectors, across these levels of the system I was just describing. And then of course, we're here in Washington, we're a think tank. We design policy reforms and we try to get them through the system as well. So I think there are probably plenty of those ideas today or in the future that we might co-design together that support the work that we're all trying to do here. So thank you for engaging in those conversations, and I look forward to more in the weeks, months, and years to come. So as we turn to the last couple conversations of the day, it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce this next Brookings Metro colleague of mine. He's a prolific author. He's a nationally recognized commentator on issues of race, structural inequality, and education. He leads the Valuing Black Assets initiative at Brookings Metro. You may have read his book, 2021, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, themes I think you'll see reflected in the video he'll introduce in a couple moments. I think he still runs a sub 7-minute mile, which I very much admire. He's a terrific scholar, tremendous asset to Brookings in the field. Please welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Andre Perry.
Thank you, Alan, and thank all of you for coming here today. As was mentioned, I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I lead the Valuing Black Assets Initiative at Brookings Metro. And essentially what I do is I try to look at the assets in every black neighborhood and every black city across the country, identifying the assets that are worthy of investments, but are devalued simply because of the racial composition around those assets. And the title of this segment is Community Development Means Investment Without Displacement, because we throw around, in my opinion, the term development way too loosely, when in fact there are awful trade-offs that we all know. And so when it comes to this meeting, we should ask ourselves, what does it mean, what do these major federal investments mean to people who formerly were burdened by these federal investments, or at least the distribution of benefits were sprinkled unevenly across our communities. Around 2018, just to give you a little context to this video I'm about to show, around 2018, my colleague Jonathan Rothwell and I, we released a report called The Devaluation of Assets in Black Communities. In it, we examine homes and the price of homes in black neighborhoods and the price of homes in white neighborhoods. And as many of you know, we found that homes in black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, we are seeing about $156 billion in lost equity all across the country. And if you know history, like I know history, you know that much of that current day devaluation was a cumulative impact of federal policies of the past. You have obviously the federally backed Homeowners Loan Corporation and redlining practices. You have urban renewal, highway construction. But, and why this is relevant to this group, those federal policies would not have had as a great of impact as they would if they did not receive the warm reception of local stakeholders. The mayors, the councils, the business councils and the like. It was local leaders that operationalized those federal policies, so we need to keep that in mind. So we've expanded this work on devaluation. We've examined the devaluation of commercial property. My colleague Tracy Lowe, who you may have seen her earlier, she's done that work, where we also find a devaluation in retail property in black communities. We've looked at businesses themselves, looking at after controlling for a number of issues, we found that black, brown, and Asian-owned firms actually score higher in Yelp than their white counterparts, but they get less stars and revenue as those businesses are situated in black neighborhoods. So we also expanded to healthcare, a number of educational institutions. And I've landed on a central thesis that guides my work. Well, the main academic question is how can we restore the value that's been extracted by racism? And I landed on a theory, a hypothesis, and it's a three-prong theory that I'll really summarize briefly. That's to invest in people, to invest in place, and divest from racist practices. Now, invest in people should be easy. You got to cut the check. You got to cut the check to the entrepreneurs, to the developers, to the homeowners. You got to get money in the hands of people, because if you invest in place, the brick and mortar, you'll effectively raise property values, people are pushed out, and you get what we currently have. Now, the third thing is divest from racism. Now, I always bring up the issue of appraising, because a lot of people think of me as a praiser man. I'm bigger than that, I think. But we see in appraising that in the price comparison model, where you compare one property to another in a neighborhood, we see that as fraught, because if you compare one property to another in a neighborhood that's been discriminated against, you effectively recycle discrimination over and over again. And so you got to invest in people, you got to invest in place, you got to divest in racism. And if you do that, I believe you won't see displacement in our development. I failed to mention that I take an asset-based approach to all of my work. I look for the strength. I look where things are going well. And so we did a little bit of a scan of cities and neighborhoods across the country, and we looked at Detroit. My father was born in Detroit. I have family in Detroit, so it was good to find that we got some initial findings that was encouraging to examine whether or not we are seeing authentic development. And so I set all that up to show you a small clip of a film that I guarantee you will be the most warming romance film you'll see all year. No, just joking. But I'm going to set it up. There's 4 neighborhoods we're examining. If you could hit the, we have the University District, we have Bagley, we have, what are the other neighborhoods? Help me out. There you go, you see them. And you see them. And we examined those neighborhoods and looked at the demographics and looked at the investment. And so right now I'm going to roll the film of community development means investment without displacement. Orlando Bailey.
Dre, welcome to your home away from home, man.
What's good? How are you? There's been massive investments in downtown, and they've been transformed. We're seeing this all across the country, and you know that has happened in Detroit, but you also know there's been incredible displacement. And so what we want to examine is whether or not there are neighborhoods that have seen investment, but without the displacement.
You know, real estate development is a long lead business. It takes 2 to 3 years to ever see something come out of the ground typically. The question for me is like, what happens in the interim? And so for me, activation is that bridge. Like, how do you kind of psychologically keep people interested? How do you psychologically keep people feeling like there's momentum in a neighborhood? And I think certain neighborhoods are way better at that kind of activation piece to keep people interested.
It feels different to have a stake in the place, right? So I'm not just some developer that's parachuting in. It's just like, no, I want to be able to walk to the development projects that I'm working on. I want to be able to be in community with the people who are activating these spaces.
The business is doing very well. A lot of them is just opening, and they haven't, you can't estimate how well they're doing right now because it's still early. But I think it takes business for the neighborhood to grow.
There's the urban planner in me is like, wow, look at all this new development. The native Black Detroiter in me is like, there are a lot of people that are left out. But for the people that are there, it's already a place. It's already a thing. It's doing something.
We've seen significant philanthropic investment in 2015 to 2020, and we've certainly seen some investment since the pandemic. And so we're examining what's going on here that's not happening all across the country. And that's where you come in. You got the data, but we want to hear from the people. We need the voices of the people. From Kresge for that wonderful support. But there's some top line findings, and if we could just go to that, is there another slide? Just very quickly, some top line findings. That the neighborhood, while it has received significant investments, now that those investments have shifted from home loans, business loans, CDFI activity, to much more philanthropic giving. We haven't seen a significant change in the Black population in those neighborhoods. Maybe one neighborhood in particular, but not more than 5% shift. We've also seen incomes pretty much stay the same. And so those main findings gives us more reason just to dig deep and hear from the people. So as I stated in the film, yes, we have the data. Now we want to just hear from people, and that's what you'll get from the video. And so with that said, I just wanted us to imagine ourselves, if we could, to see ourselves in the same context as others in a similar position after the 1930s, in the 1940s. And as we're making decisions about how these resources are going to be used, we need to be mindful of the disenfranchised groups that are in our neighborhoods. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the closing session.
Thank you, Andre, so much for sharing the context, the teaser trailer for the project. I think it'll be in theaters this Christmas, right? Again, like a heartwarming story about a Brookings scholar in a neighborhood. More seriously, I mean, as Andre closed with, amid all these conversations we're having about this historic investment moment, it's an essential reminder about what we collectively owe communities like Livernois 6 Mile and the intentional, patient, deliberate work it's going to take to deliver on their behalf. Switching gears now, why don't I invite our panelists up while I introduce the next panel. It's the last panel of the day. We're going to zoom out a little bit to focus on the big bets that, in particular, the CHIPS and Science Act has made on America's semiconductor industry. There are huge hopes that these bets will drive inclusive economic growth in many corners of the country. Naturally, the Intel Corporation, America's largest semiconductor manufacturing company, will have an important role in fulfilling that promise. So we're so pleased that Safia Boa, Intel Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer, is joining us today. He'll be in conversation with Amy Liu, Interim President of Brookings, immediate past Vice President and Founding Director of Brookings Metro, nationally recognized expert on city and metropolitan issues, and my very talented boss. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Alan. And I just want to thank everyone, both in Brookings Metro and for Kresge, for pulling together such a great day. I've been both informed and super inspired, and I hope you all have too. And I think having this conversation follow a conversation about that Andre featured for us, also reminds us that when we do this work in cities and regions, that we have to hold the complexity of how we partner with corporations and industry sectors and universities at the regional scale, while also being very mindful of the sub-regional level of neighborhoods and engagement and community involvement. And we need both for these transformative investments to really result in not status quo outcomes. And so I hope we can talk a little bit about that with Saf. I just want to say first, I'm not going to have a sports baseball metaphor, so I apologize for that. And just turning over to Saf, One of the things I learned while we were waiting here is that he grew up in Botswana, and also, clearly has had a long career in Intel and McKinsey before coming into his role now at Intel. And I do think that Intel, I think, as you all well know, is at the center of the CHIPS and Science Act in the sense that they're a major player. Not only are they a global leader in chip and semiconductor manufacturing and world-changing technology, they also have made sizable investments in place, right? In Columbus, Ohio, in Phoenix, in their traditional hub outside of Portland, Oregon. And I hope we can talk about that today. And I was, as you all know, and Saf and I talked about this, the other thing we want to explore is how do we make sure that as Intel partners and many of your companies partner in place, how do we make sure that these investments don't lead to business as usual? And so, Saf, I want to welcome you. Really glad you can join us today.
Thank you very much, and really excited to be here. But I come from an education in the English system, so you always have to apologize. I understand that Buttigieg was supposed to be here, and so obviously I'm not going to fill his shoes. But the only upside is we both were consultants at McKinsey. So
I do want to start big and global, and I do want to acknowledge the horrific crisis in the Middle East and the overall turmoil we have in the global economy and the global order. I do think the CHIPS and Science Act was very aware of that environment. So tell me, how does Intel think about its role in this historic piece of legislation and its own role in applying that in this new global dynamic?
thank you for that question. That's a, it's a pretty long answer, but I'll try and keep it short. First of all, let me first acknowledge the issues in the Middle East. You know, and it actually is very very central to this conversation. Intel is, many people don't know, is the largest single private sector employer in Israel. We've been in Israel for a very long time, and we have a very large factory there. We have some of our biggest development. In fact, one of our best development centers is in Israel, and we have many employees in Israel, many friends. I have about 300 people on my staff in Israel, and so this has been a very difficult experience for us. Maybe I'll zoom out and talk about the CHIPS Act for a minute. The genesis of the CHIPS Act, I think, really came to focus during the pandemic. But it's been an issue for quite a long time. The core issue is that the world has become highly dependent on silicon. We call it the siliconomy. Everything that we do relies on silicon to work. You know, your iWatch, all the way to your cars, to your planes, the networks that we use to run our internet, every single thing requires silicon. And over the last 20-odd years, because of globalization and the sort of the global competition and the chasing of efficiency, we have diversified this, the industry has diversified this part of the supply chain. And we woke up 3-4 years ago where all of the advanced semiconductors were being manufactured in an island the size of Switzerland, was producing 92-95% of all of the advanced silicon. And the thing that nobody really talks about is 30-40% of the mature silicon. The mature silicon is what goes into cars, is what, you know, most people use. The advanced is what, you know, the phone companies use and so on. And this challenge of having such a high concentration of the next oil of the global universe, of how the world works, it's become a huge issue, not just from a, you know, sort of geopolitical issue, but frankly from a supply chain issue in terms of just running your business. You know, Taiwan it's a fantastic island, but it doesn't have any energy resources. It imports 98% of its energy. It does not have a lot of water. It doesn't have a lot of minerals. Imports all the minerals required to make the semiconductors. It's on It's on a fault line for earthquakes, right? And so if you step back from this, put the geopolitics aside for a minute, the whole tech industry, the whole world is basically being driven by with high set of concentration in one island, off the coast of China, in the middle of the straits, with almost no ability to be resilient. And so the principal driver of the CHIPS Act is around resilience, around global supply chain resilience. And to that end, the question then was, okay, so if we're going to do as an industry and as a continent and as a world drive resilience, what is the answer? And the answer had to be that we had to build and create capacity for leading semiconductor manufacturing globally. It has to be in Europe, has to be obviously in North America, and it has to be diversified. And that's the real principle of the CHIPS Act. Why do we need money to drive this? Intel is an IDM in our industry. We manufacture our own chips, and we are self-sufficient. But most of the other companies in the semiconductor industry only rely on Taiwan. And so in order for manufacturing to be done here, we actually had to create the government has to create real incentives to actually create this manufacturing. Taiwan has a structural advantage. Their government provides incredible support that is not available in the US for manufacturing. I know there's a lot of states and locals who provide tax benefits and so on, but it's of no scale to what Taiwan provides for TSMC. And so the CHIPS Act is really trying to provide money to help create the right incentives and level the playing field so that companies like us can build capacity to try and create more resilience in the supply chain.
Your CEO uses the term siliconomy.
Thank
you. But it builds on your point about the fact that the world now centers around silicon. What does that mean, that term?
So what it means is what happened during the pandemic when we couldn't get cars, right? If you remember, there was no cars. People were couldn't get fridges. It took 2 years to order and get a phone. There were a huge amount of cars sitting in Detroit that the car companies couldn't ship because the chips that they needed to operate the car essentially were not available. That is just a small taste of what the world running on silicon means. If the supply chain for silicon gets disrupted, not only would the telephone networks not work, the phone networks, but the things that we've all gotten used to using, cloud services, all runs on silicon. Imagine all of a sudden if your iCloud stopped working because the Apple didn't have enough capacity to support your pictures that you're uploading. That's a huge issue. And so when we talk about the siliconomy, we're talking about the fact that the foundation and the oxygen that the modern global economy runs on is silicon.
And so let's now ground this in place. Why make sizable investments in a couple regions, and why those regions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you just back up for a minute, what do you need to build a plant? A big semiconductor plant. Each plant costs almost $30 billion, right? So it's not for the faint of heart. And these plants require a huge amount of water, huge amount of electricity. They require world-class construction capabilities in welding. These plants cannot have any dust in them, no vibrations. They have to not be near fault lines. So when you go through that process, you have to immediately get to places, very few places that can meet that criteria. And that is probably the biggest driver where those conditions are met. So there's many places in the United States, for example, where would be interesting. Texas, for example, is a great place. But there are many parts of Texas that we can't build plants because of risk of natural issues and so on and so forth.
So again, you ended up in Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio.
Phoenix, or outside.
Arizona, yep.
Yep, Arizona. And are you expanding your presence in Portland?
We are expanding our presence. Portland has been, I mean, one of the most incredible, pivoting to a bit to this the issue du jour. One of the most incredible things, and we're happy to send it, is the before and after picture of Portland, of Intel, before we put a plant and now what it is, right? Basically, a city was created.
Yeah.
So Portland will always be the heart of Intel. It's where we do a lot of our research. It's where we kind of launch most of our products.
So tell us about the role that your partnerships in communities play. I think as a policy wonk, we all know, or we think, that part of the success of the silicon industry is going to be because it just naturally clusters, because there are certain assets you bring together and need to invest and increase the chances. From an employer point of view, what are the most important partnerships or engagements you have forged in Ohio, in Arizona, in Oregon to make sure, sort of this economic vision takes hold?
Yeah, to be candid, we are proud of our track record because it's not just those places. It's also Israel, as I said. It's also Malaysia. It's also Costa Rica. And I start with the fact that Intel is the silicon of Silicon Valley. I mean, Silicon Valley started because, our founders created Intel, and that created the whole ecosystem of companies around us that then spawned, HP and a whole bunch of companies that now, represent Silicon Valley. And so that's a huge lesson that's always been a huge lesson for us about how to be, we think about ourselves as being open. We have an open company. And the implication is that we foster and allow others to participate in our value chain in an open way without us being vertically integrated. So we're very comfortable using suppliers, and we're very comfortable people using our technology. But that is maybe more on the design side. I think what you're really driving to is on the manufacturing side. So we've learned a lot as a company. The first thing that we've learned is that the most important thing that we need to do when we go to build a factory is to make sure that we are doing, because it takes 3 to 4 years to build it, that we are building enough local talent that can come into the factories and run it. It's a very important issue. We've discovered that empowering the locals to be the people who run the factories, they are always the best employees, the most driven, and the highest performing. And so we do 3 things. One, we work with the universities in the areas to basically, we design programs. We design degrees and help the universities install it in order to create a pipeline of talent that can work with us. We spend a lot of time with the community colleges, high schools, to, again, create programs, and with us paying for it, to ensure that we get, because we need technicians, we need, researchers. We need people who just finished high school who want to come and work in the factory to make money to go to college. And so we have a whole team that spends all their time trying to understand, making sure that we're getting as much supply of talent as possible for our factories. The second thing that we try and do is really, it's $30 billion we're going to put in the ground. And so and the surveys and we've done suggest that every employee, job that we creates 7 other jobs. And the impact of the spend is also about 7x, right, in terms of the local economy. And again, what we found is that for us to be successful, right, there's going to be many issues that we'll have to deal with. Making sure that the local communities is involved and integrated into the construction, into the supply chain, into the road building. We show up, we need to build 1,000 houses, we need to build schools. Making sure that that is locally driven has proven to be a critical success factor. The third one is that, as I said, what we do is in some ways incredibly dirty. We use really, really dangerous chemicals to clean the wafers. We consume a ton of water. We use a lot of electricity. We build, our construction is very, very precise, and so requires a ton of people to come with a lot of equipment. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that whatever we're doing is as green as possible. We only use green energy, right? We recycle 99% of the water that we use. And we have invested a tremendous amount of money in making sure that we have a supply chain to take the waste out of the communities in which we work and make sure that it's stored and processed properly. And so we invest because clearly we are very concerned about any type of problems that we could create in those communities. Normally our factories are pretty far away from where most people live, and so it is not as disruptive from an urban perspective, but we're incredibly careful. I mean, we for example, in Arizona, we have a factory in Arizona. It's very close to a Native American area, and so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that they participate with us, but also they've been very concerned, and rightly so, that we don't pollute. And so a lot of things that we do is just to make sure is preventative.
So I want to double down on two things that you said.
Sure.
And I think that this is really important because I think everyone understands the importance and the urgency around improving the U.S. capability around innovation, dynamism, and our competitive edge in that way. I think the conversations today, and I think in many communities is, and maybe you're experiencing it too in these places, is how do we make sure they're racially inclusive? How do we make sure that that these investments don't exacerbate inequality? Because I think the model for tech growth has historically been to lead to wider inequality by income, by race, and in some ways it could even be by geography, where most of these jobs are really far away and not as accessible by transit or other modes for many of the workers who might benefit. So I think I'm curious, how do you think about the goals around inclusion and access and wealth building? Is that part of the objectives in the way you do your partnerships? And then how does that show up in the way you do your work?
Yeah, so it's a very important point and something that we wrestle with a lot, because as we know, in this global economy we are in, there's a much higher return to education than in the past, right? So so we are a very engineering-driven organization. So we measure everything. So we spend, our supply chain team measures the amount of the spend that is being consumed by the local, by diverse groups, underrepresented minorities, and we have very clear targets that we measure them on and that they're compensated against. And so we take that incredibly seriously, and we believe that unless you measure it, you can't manage it. Unless you comp on it, it doesn't get done. And so we do that. But I think the question is it enough, right? I think the nuance of this is, as I said, there's higher returns to knowledge and experience. I mean, it's if you happen to be a physicist living in Columbus, there's a high return to being a physicist living in Columbus, right? And number one. Number two, do we really measure income distribution spread and we don't have metrics on that. We have metrics on making sure that the community at large is improving, and we also spend a lot of time making sure that, especially in terms of racial disparities and in terms of women and in terms of people without degrees, right? We've realized that that's a huge untapped talent pool, that we're getting our unfair share. But I'm sure we could do more. And I think we are always open, as I said, to learn what others are doing and to understand problems that are there that we don't even see that we can help address. But we measure this. We spend a lot of time making sure that it's part of, we call them OKRs. I don't know if it's part of our OKRs.
Yeah. I want to come back to this more, but I want to go to the other piece of this, which is about the environment and the climate. And you already have said multiple times how water-intensive and energy-intensive this industry is. Glad to hear that that's something you're very conscientious about in all your locations. I keep thinking about how this plays out in Arizona when water supply is such a big issue in the Southwest. So talk to us and share stories about not only how you as a company think about this, but again, how does this show up in the way you partner in place and your civic engagement?
Yeah, so we take this very seriously. For me, we've signed up to all of the targets, and from a corporate perspective, that we, in terms of 2030 goals and so on and so forth. And as I said, being an engineering organization, we translate that all into metrics and to things that we need to deliver at certain points. And so we have clarity on what only using green technology for our power. And that has been the case for 4 or 5 years. And that's incredibly important. The way we drive that is we invest a lot in the supply chain of finding companies who can deliver to the huge, the energy can't come to us and have any variation in it. Otherwise, it destroys the silicon. So you can imagine how much money we spend making sure that the supply chain for that is good. Same with water, same with, sort of hazardous materials. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the number of companies that can do that are very few. And so we spend a lot of time developing them and making sure that they are working with locals and other people in the supply chain for us. So that's the one thing we do. The second part of the question you asked, apart from the conservation issue, to be honest with you, the really other big issue is talent.
Yeah, yep.
And what happens a lot is that we, is this issue you're talking about, displacement, we worry about, because, there is, sometimes you go into places where there are farms, and we become, and it creates a city. Is that, we think that's a good thing, but those are things that we worry about.
I do know that some of the discussions today, and even in some of these communities, are also really thinking about new ways of partnering with large companies like yours. And one of the things that's we're all highly aware of is there are a lot of taxpayer incentives that are used
Absolutely.
to bring a large firm like yours to invest, right, in a community, and some form of community benefits or other things, because in some ways Intel can't take care of the affordable housing situation in a community, right? There are housing trust funds or other kind of programs and investments and pools that communities have to think about that are adjacent,
Absolutely.
right? So think about, like, I do think there's a real pressure now on corporate responsibility, that in exchange for taxpayer resources and incentives, how are you then going to put some resources back into the community? And I think this is still a thing to pioneer, right? A thing to figure out. Is Intel in those conversations? How do you think about, again, those other kinds of benefits around safety, housing affordability, human services that support, or childcare that is really critical, transportation, transit access, that's really critical to making sure you get the workers that you need.
It's a great point. And the short answer is we think about that very deeply. And I'll give you some examples of the things that at least we do and we're exploring doing more. So the first is that when we show up, especially from a factory perspective, usually we have to build roads to build the factories. We have to build accommodation for our people to live there. We have to build data center to run our factory. We have to build schools for the construction and the engineers that show up. And one of the things that we do is that we overbuild and make all of that available to the community we're serving, that we're working in. So we will build electricity for our plant, and we'll make that, and we use that as a anchor tenant, if you will, for our electricity supplier so that they can supply, they overbuild and supply the community we're in. And we do it in a way where that supplier obviously is now on a marginal cost, and so can supply electricity in much cheaper than if the community had to go buy it retail, if you will. And we do that across all of the different categories in terms of schools, all the infrastructure we build. We do it in a way that it is not just for Intel, but it's for the community. So that's something that we spend a lot of time on. Second thing that we do is, typically when we come, we're bringing, we have to bring hire quite a number of people, and they have to live somewhere. And what we found time and time again is that we have to guarantee the quality of the buildings, and many times we have to either directly or work with banks to provide lower cost financing for people to acquire this land. Now, a lot of the time the land is very close to us or even owned by us, and so we have a lot of leverage to get the financial partners to provide loans to our workers and also the people who now live in those communities to actually get financing for construction much cheaper, or for buying a house, much cheaper than, again, if it was just retail. And so what we spend a lot of time doing is trying to understand how the things that we are doing, we have to do, how we can, from an economics perspective, after we've paid for the fixed cost, how do we make the access, to the community.
I think we're almost out of time. I think that's
Thank
all
God
I
it
was
was.
supposed to be.
Is that a message to me? That makes sure that fixed cost, if you will, is available, is paid for, and therefore the community get marginal cost. And so those, and there are many other things that I'm sure that I'm forgetting, but that's the mindset we have.
Let me close. We have just a little bit of time
Sure.
left. My last question is going to take a line from Andre, which is the importance of investing in people.
Sure.
And it is about talent. Every conversation, right, is about we don't have enough workers, and yet I think there's abundant talent or hidden talent in our communities. What is Intel doing to, I think you said you've learned a lot about this. How are you partnering at scale in a way that's going to bring a whole new generation of new talent, hidden talent into this industry, into the array of occupations I think this will spark?
So it's a great question. So first of all, I think the industry overall needs many more engineers.
Yeah.
Right? We're in a war for talent, for engineering talent, and I think if my CEO is here, he'd say that everybody who gets a PhD or a master's degree in computer science or material science or physics that is not American should get a green card stapled to their degree, right? I mean, it is unconscionable. I mean, I'm an immigrant. I went to MIT and I did engineering, and it's crazy that in today's days it's so hard for our people who've come and trained in our schools to not have the opportunity to stay and work for. You don't even have to work for Intel. We prefer that. But so number one, that is a huge structural problem we have in the country that we believe it needs to get fixed. It's not just an H-1B issue. It's like literally, this is the best talent that has been trained. So that's one. Two is, it's very clear that there are a lot of highly talented people who either decided couldn't afford to go to college or to go to sort of a renowned, engineering university. We invest a ton of time and money in what we call bridge programs, right? So getting people into especially in the communities we work, to get trained, sometimes in community colleges, sometimes in independent schools, to get trained to be able to work with us. And once they come in, there's a continuous learning, and some of them become, principal engineers. Or some of them run some of the most complicated equipment. There's some equipment in our fabs that is $100 million. One piece of equipment. I mean, it's multiple floors, right? So you need like really good engineers to run these assets. And then third is that we're investing a lot in advocating in the communities we work in, that all the way from primary school, adding STEM and into the curriculum. And we as Intel, through our foundation, through our activities, spend a lot of money trying to get the communities we're in, the places where we think we should get talent, to engage on STEM as early as possible. And so, and that does not speak to the amount of work we do with universities through our labs and so on and so forth. So, for us, this is a war about talent, and it's an all play.
Well, staff, I want to thank you for your thoughtfulness. Our thoughts and prayers are for your employees and workers and communities in Israel. Please join me in thanking staff for his time today. And I believe I now turn things over to my dear colleagues, Briggs, to close us out.
Thanks again to Amy and to Saf. As you two had the conversation, my mind went back to a White House meeting I was a part of nearly 25 years ago. The subject on the table was H-1B visas. It was where the talent would come from. We were in the middle of the first big internet-fueled wave of business growth and all the tremendous wealth that created. And I remember thinking that we were having almost no conversation at all about local communities, about on-ramps for Black and Hispanic and other disadvantaged communities in particular in that region. And the Silicon Valley is one kind of, where's the title? One community among many. And it produces, as Amy and Saf reminded us, for the whole world, not just the local region. It has created absolutely extraordinary things. It is also one of the most economically unequal on earth. It's one of the most insanely unaffordable places. That's a Brookings technical term. It is many things, but it is also a cautionary tale, right? We're talking about really what will it take to do things differently. It's my job in just a few minutes, and I will only take a few, to close this extraordinary conversation we've been able to have today. I want again to thank Rip and his team at the Kresge Foundation. Not only for the financial support that has made it possible for us to come together and inform and teach each other, but for being partners in every sense, every step of the way. We imagined this together. We reached out together to friends, new and old, across the country from so many different backgrounds. We couldn't have done it without you guys. I want now to take the liberty, Rip, of saying just a couple of quick thank yous on behalf of Brookings and Kresge, if that's okay. Could we thank the team of our colleagues that produced this meeting for us? They sweated over every detail, of course, and many of you experienced that firsthand, all the care and attention that went in. So except for those couple of things, you guys, I am not going to say what typically gets said at this stage in the meeting. I'm not here to be your rapporteur. We're going to take a little time to digest all of this. We're going to share some takeaways, I'm sure. Some of them may be hidden in plain sight. Some may be counterintuitives, things that sort of surprised us that we didn't know would come up today, that we think we want to put a light on. And we'll share those out, and we will ask for yours as well. And we're really eager to hear from you. It's just, it's core to the way we work. And we'd really love to know what you're taking away and to stay in close touch. So that will come, and I am sure it will get turbocharged too. Friendly reminder, we're on the eve of another big, big election year. And we're thinking a lot about what that can give lift to and where we need to show up in certain debates too with our values, frankly. So this moment is not for reporting out, and as our minds turn to getting home and to that email inbox I know you cherish, let me ask you this to stay with me here in the room and keep your attention here just a couple of minutes longer. I want to paraphrase that beautiful thought from Adlai Stevenson. Do not forget when you leave here why you really came. I think we all came here to get, well, probably for a few reasons, but to get more aware. This topic we've tackled today is vast. The waterfront is vast. Rob said it at the top of the day, not in our lifetimes, not in a couple of lifetimes, have we seen something quite like this, let alone been a part of it, each in our own special way. I think we came to get more equipped. I heard many people say, I wanted to do some learning, a little bit outside my lane, people I'm not in conversation with every day. This work being so vast and so multifaceted, and certainly more connected. And we saw a lot of that going on today, and that's absolutely what we wanted. I don't know about you, but there's something more too. I came to get re-inspired, to be reminded of the urgency of what's possible, but not assured, of the wisdom and courage that exist all across this land, and this room is a small microcosm of it, but that's a part of what inspires us. To be reminded of the heart and not just the mind this work demands. Yes, we're a think tank, and I heard the word nerd and nerd out said a few times. There's a lot of detail and a lot of nuance to this, so no surprise about that today. But I think we heard reminders too, perhaps in more subtle ways, of the tremendous presence and heart, as I said, that it takes to do this work. Patience and relentlessness. Humility and brio to step up into a moment like this. So I want to close by thanking you, yes, for making the time to be here, given the many things here and abroad, especially over the last week, competing for your time and your attention and your deepest concern. Thank you. But that is not the big thing. Do you want to know the big thing? Do you want to know the big thing? The big thing is this. Thank you for what you will do, for what you have not yet done, to be the change. Not just to call in and where needed to call out others for what they're doing or not doing, as the case may be, but also to be clear about what you are accountable for contributing. Might feel called to contribute. We have a phrase in Spanish, para adelante. Folks just say pa'lante. It takes too long to say the other thing. Pa'lante means onward, forward, but it also means something more. It means forward no matter what. So thank you for being part of this very special day. Thank you for what you will yet do. Pa'lante, and safe travels.